There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. There is unity in the oppression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. There is unity in the oppression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. There is unity in the oppression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. There is unity in the impression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. There is unity in the impression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. There is unity in the impression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response.
Hello and welcome to the 29th Vigil that we've been holding for Julian Assange. It's now been 1 month since the WikiLeaks founder was carried out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London and thrown in jail. On Wednesday, Assange received his first social visit, and the next day, on Thursday, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture paid 2 visits to him that day, one with a doctor who examined him. On Friday, Chelsea Manning, WikiLeaks source for the Iraq war logs and the Afghan war diaries, as well as the State Department cables, was released from an Alexandria, Virginia jail. She had been imprisoned for refusing to testify against Assange in a grand jury proceeding that prosecutors want to use to pin more charges on Assange, very likely under the Espionage Act, but it's not over for Manning.
And we have a quote. We have a quote from the Sparrow Project. They said, quote, earlier today, Chelsea Manning was released from the William G. Truesdale Adult Detention Center in Alexandria, Virginia. Chelsea's release follows the expiration of the term of the EDVA grand jury that previously demanded her testimony. Chelsea was in jail for 62 days after she was found in contempt of court for her refusal to give testimony. The following is a statement from Chelsea's legal team. They said, quote, today marked the expiration of the term of the grand jury, and so, after 62 days of confinement, Chelsea was released from the Alexandria Detention Center earlier today. Unfortunately, even prior to her release, Chelsea was served with another subpoena. This means she's expected to appear before a different grand jury on Thursday, May 16th, 2019, just 1 week from her release today. It is therefore conceivable that she will once again be held in contempt of court and be returned to the custody of the Alexandria Detention Center, possibly as soon as next Thursday, May 16. Chelsea will continue to refuse to answer questions and will use every available legal defense to prove to District Judge Trenga that she has just cause for her refusal to give testimony. A more detailed statement from Chelsea is forthcoming, they said. And that's the end of the quote from Sparrow Media.
Yes, before we go on, Elizabeth, I thought we'd take a moment to understand what is happening here and the weight of this decision by Chelsea Manning, the self-sacrifice this person is making. On principle, number one, she does not believe in grand juries, and number two, she believes that there's nothing more that she could add to this case. With this to set the background of what we're going to read now, which is a declaration that she made to the court, to the Eastern District of Virginia, on May 7th. That would have been 3 days ago. An extraordinary statement that we're going to read in full.
Absolutely.
That everyone who hears this will understand exactly where she's coming from. But I just wanted to set the framework to show that why they want her, it appears, is, and she makes reference to this in the statement we're going to read, that they want to have a superseding indictment on Julian Assange, that they are not going to be satisfied, obviously, with 5 years in jail. If they should bring him to the U.S., if he should be extradited from Belmarsh prison in London, and he would be subject only to a 5-year charge for supposedly hacking into a computer. Of course, we know that, in fact, he was trying to help Chelsea to hide her identity, because she already had top secret access to everything. She did not need his help to break in. So the prevailing view is that he's going to be charged with a superseding indictment, which would take over and replace the one that exists now as a kind of placeholder that's keeping him in Belmarsh, and which the extradition hearings began about. And they need Chelsea's testimony. Otherwise, they would not be now threatening to throw her back in jail. She got out only because the grand jury that she was being forced to testify to ended. But a new one is going to be impaneled in a week, so she has 6 days of freedom, but she's going to refuse again to testify and will very likely wind up back in jail again for the duration of that grand jury. Before we read this statement, Elizabeth, maybe you want to say a few words about what's happened to her, her release, and her impending re-arrest and imprisonment.
Right. Well, I think that the fact that she's willing to go to prison to stand on principle after having already experienced 7 years of imprisonment and at times what we would describe as torture is absolutely incredible. And I think it's a very rare person that would be willing to put their lives at risk in that sense and give up everything that they've gotten in terms of freedom since having her sentence being given clemency by Obama. I think it's incredibly, incredibly brave. And I think the fact that she's going to go back again on principle in about a week, I cannot imagine what it would feel like to walk free for a week knowing that you have to go back to prison because you're standing on principle. And I think, hopefully her situation will raise awareness about the kind of corrupt atmosphere and the corrupt sort of system of the grand jury itself, and the fact that it's not what most Americans would consider a form of, legitimate justice. And I hope that she's raising awareness on that front, as well as on the, persecution of Assange and WikiLeaks that the grand jury is intended to kind of enact. So.
Yeah, earlier today I was on Brian Becker and John Kiriako's show, Loud and Clear, and we were discussing Chelsea Manning's situation. And as we're going to read now, she's not going to provide any more information to them, and she's making that abundantly clear. She's willing to stay in jail for as long as necessary. We were speculating that maybe they're throwing her in jail out of revenge, or there are some people within the Trump administration, Republicans, who are unhappy with Obama having commuted her sentence. She had originally been sentenced to 33 years, I believe, and was released after 7 years by Obama as he was leaving office. And some people think that she was just thrown in there again to punish her for a previous crime, because it's kind of hard to understand what they think they're trying to get out of her when she's insisting that there's nothing more she could say. So, Elizabeth, unless you have a few other words, we can begin. I will begin reading this declaration to the court, or to the Eastern District, the prosecutors. That is a really extraordinary document. I think it really bears having it read completely by both me and Elizabeth. Do you have anything to add before I begin, Elizabeth?
Not at all. I just think that, I'm looking forward to reading this because I think it will. It's a very moving statement. So. Yeah,
and very instructive.
Definitely.
I think many of the questions we have about Chelsea Manning and what this is all about are answered in this statement by her. So I'm going to begin reading it. I will read the first 5 paragraphs, and then Elizabeth will read the next 5, and we'll go that way. There are 25 paragraphs in all. So this, again, was filed in the grand jury subpoena. Chelsea Manning, subpoenaed party. She made this declaration on the 5th of May, and it was filed on the 6th of May, so that was 4 days ago. My name is Chelsea Elizabeth Manning. I am competent to be a witness, and I possess personal knowledge of the facts set forth below. Currently, I am confined at the Alexandria Detention Center in Alexandria, Virginia, following a finding of civil contempt on March 8, 2019, for refusing to cooperate in a grand jury investigation that I believe relates to events already disclosed in exhaustive testimony in 2013, including the extent of my knowledge. Initially, after arriving at the Alexandria Detention Center, which we will call ADC from now on, the jail placed me in administrative segregation, ADSEG, status, despite the stated concerns of myself and my legal representatives regarding the effects of prolonged isolation, compounding the trauma that I suffered in a year of solitary confinement during my previous time in confinement. I stayed on ADSEG for 28 days without any misbehavior or ill will on my or anyone else's part to rationalize such isolation. This isolation caused extraordinary pain for me. While in ADSEG, or administrative segregation, I suffered many of the ill effects of prolonged isolation as described by former United Nations Special Rapporteur on torture Juan Mendez, for instance, consistent with the research of former Harvard Medical School professor Stuart Grazian, I experienced difficulty keeping attention on anything, sometimes referred to as dissociative stupor. Thinking and concentrating get harder. Anxiety, frustration with minor things, irritation, and a spiraling inability to tolerate each symptom take hold. At one point, I started feeling ill during a short visit and a non-contact visit booth while struggling to have even a normal conversation After weeks under similar stimulation, I became nauseated with vertigo and vomited on the floor, ending my visit prematurely. Such symptoms make up what Grazian describes as a special psychiatric syndrome caused by prolonged solitary confinement. Many of the effects last permanently after only 15 days of isolation. After public outcry and pressure, the Alexandria Detention Center released me into general population after 28 days of isolation.
And her statement continues. She says, quote, "After 2 months of confinement and using every legal mechanism available so far, I can, without any hesitation, state that nothing will convince me to testify before this or any other grand jury for that matter. This experience so far only proves my long-held belief that grand juries are simply outdated tools used by the federal government to harass and disrupt political opponents and activists in fishing expeditions. Without committing a federal crime and after exhaustive testimony at a trial several years ago, I am again ripped from my life by a vindictive and politically motivated investigation and prosecution. The way I am being treated proves what a corrupt and abusive tool the grand jury truly is. With each passing day, my disappointment and frustration grow, but so too do my commitments to doing the right thing and continuing to refuse to submit. My decision not to testify before the grand jury is rooted in the study of history and philosophical principles. Many times in this nation's history, people who speak out or express dissent against the government face disproportionate repression. One of the most common tools is to silence dissent. The grand jury attempts to sow distrust within activists' organizations and communities through secrecy and compelling, exhaustive, and redundant testimony aimed at identifying other members of that community. She continues saying, I understand that this grand jury related to my disclosures of classified and unclassified but sensitive information and records in 2010. I acted alone in these disclosures. The government is still preoccupied with punishing me despite a court-martial sentence and presidential commutation nearly 2 years ago. This can be seen in statements and actions by several administration officials, especially the current Secretary of State, who threatened Harvard University over a low-paid speaking engagement in 2017 when he was Director of Central Intelligence. This speaks compellingly to my rationale for both my disclosures, for which I already served time, and my present refusal to cooperate with an increasingly frightening and untrustworthy government. Let me state clearly, again, that my actions were my own. I believe my principles allow me to focus on helping others and to challenge the use of power to coerce or manipulate people. Such coercive power forms what I define as violence and the threat of violence, which powerful institutions attempt to accumulate to obtain more power. I do not believe, nor do I possess any reasonable evidence to believe, that participating in this grand jury could lead to any new theories of criminal liability for any person. I took responsibility for my actions over 6 years ago. I find it difficult to comprehend that the Department of Justice believes that my redundant testimony could actually provide any value to an investigation. Their stated reasons appear disingenuous at best and outright malicious at worst. The government's theories contradict not only my testimony, but the forensic evidence the military possesses. Therefore, I suspect they are simply interested in previewing my potential testimony as a defense witness and attempting to undermine my testimony without the benefit of reviewing forensic evidence. This justifies my theory that participating in this investigation functions simply to abuse the justice system for political ends.
I think that this paragraph 10 is the crucial, most important thing that she says here. She says she does not believe, she has no reasonable evidence to believe that taking part in this grand jury process could lead to any new theories of criminal liability for any person. Of course, the person she's referring to is Julian Assange, who's been in prison for a month now in Belmarsh after he was arrested April 11th. They have him on this 5-year charge. Clearly, they want to get him for more. They want her to talk to this grand jury. They clearly need her to talk to the grand jury to get more charges or superseding charges against Assange. And she's saying here clearly that it could not, whatever she says to the grand jury would not lead to any new theories of criminal liability for Assange. She took responsibility for those actions 6 years ago. She paid her price in jail, and she doesn't understand how the Justice Department can believe that her redundant testimony repeating what she'd already said, could actually provide any value to an investigation. She doesn't believe in their reasons for wanting her to testify. They think that their theories, the government theories, which is, of course, what I think she's referring to is the indictment of Assange, that he helped her to break into a government computer, when we all know she had access to that through her top secret clearance and only needed assistance to sign in a way that would hide her identity. So the government's theories contradict not only my own testimony from her court-martial in 2013, but the forensic evidence the military possesses. This is key. The forensic evidence of the computer, she says, does not bear out this allegation that Assange helped her break into the computer. And she thinks they simply want to preview her testimony as a defense witness. This is very, very key. If, in fact, Assange is ever brought to the U.S. and put on trial, excuse me, Chelsea Manning is a potential defense witness for Assange, and they illegally here cannot use a grand jury to try to get to know what in advance what a potential witness will be saying, because she would be giving, if she went to the grand jury, testimony without any, as she says, forensic evidence being available to show, and more importantly, I think even that she has no counsel there. She would appear in a grand jury without a lawyer. That, of course, would not be the case if she were a witness in a trial of Assange. She would certainly be able to consult with a lawyer if she wanted to. So this paragraph is extraordinarily important. She thinks that what they're doing right now is simply to abuse the justice system for political ends. She goes on, I believe this grand jury seeks to undermine the integrity of public discourse with the aim of punishing those who expose any serious, ongoing, and systematic abuses of power by this government, as well as the rest of the international community. Therefore, participating in this fishing expedition, which potentially exposes other innocent people to the grand jury process, would constitute an unjustifiable and unethical action. Now, after sustaining serious psychological injury from my current confinement, I don't wish to expose any other person to the trauma and exhaustion of civil contempt or other forms of prison or coercion. In jail at ADC, I try every day to maintain my physical, mental, intellectual capacities, as well as some modicum of human dignity. I live a quiet social life in a housing unit that holds 12 people who rotate frequently. I try to occupy myself with crossword and Sudoku puzzles in the absence of good reading material. I try to stay positive despite the aftermath of isolation and the knowledge that my life, once again, is put on hold for a few more years, potentially a few more years. With limited books, I read what I can, though most are books that are either already read by me or are simply bad. I am reaccustomed to the intrusion and lack of privacy of frequent searches and heavy surveillance. I arrived at ADC with concerns, with limited books, and anxiety about my physical what I can, though most health, particularly so soon after gender confirmation surgery in October. My post-surgery regimen requires delicate and regular self-care at least twice daily, including the use of antibacterial soaps, etc. I think we could skip forward. I mean, she's living in a horrible situation for someone in this post-operative situation. She says, in an ideal world, agreeing to cooperate would avoid this situation. However, this government abuses the grand jury process and forces me to choose between an unethical decision and suffering intimate and permanent consequences for doing the right thing. I am not willing to compromise for my own physical benefit. This decision comes at an overwhelming cost. My physical and mental health deteriorate rapidly in conditions normally reserved for short-term confinement. I am almost entirely without sunlight. My skin regularly breaks off from bacterial infections. I gain weight due to poor nutrition, currently at nearly 20 pounds since March. Elizabeth.
Sleep and concentration remain difficult. Mental health access remains limited, without access to comprehensive treatment for complex post-traumatic stress, stemming in part from previous confinement conditions. My business now falters. now without me able to appear at speaking engagements or professional consultations. I recently laid off a valuable and trusted employee. Numerous existing contracts remain vulnerable, likely needing renegotiation or outright cancellation. My friends and colleagues suffer from the impact of my absence, causing me to worry endlessly about their health and well-being. I missed the premiere event of a documentary about my commutation, which dozens of my friends reunited afterward. I sometimes see visitors, but only in a non-contact booth with inches of glass between us. This makes visitation uncomfortable, surreal, and saddening. I receive between dozens and several hundred letters a day. I lack the resources or time to respond to even a small fraction of these. The impact on my friends and supporters feels overwhelming and makes me feel lonely. And she says, I receive an enormous support from all around the world. My family and close friends all support me and express their pride of me. It's emotionally overwhelming sometimes to see their unwavering generosity. I receive warmth and strength from colleagues, educators, lawyers, diplomats, activists, factory workers, veterans, journalists, union leaders, store clerks, gardeners, chefs, airplane pilots, and politicians from all across the US and the world at large, every class, culture, and age imaginable.
Despite the heartbreak and hardship, cooperation with this grand jury is simply not an option. Doing so would mean throwing away all of my principles, accomplishments, sacrifices, and erase decades of my reputation, an obvious impossibility. As before, I cannot regain the lost time, which may again extend to years. Repairing the damage to my relationships and both my physical and mental health might never come to pass. Whatever one might make of my principles and decisions, I shall continue to make hard choices and sacrifices rather than relinquish my ethical positions in exchange for mere trinkets of personal gain or self-pleasure in the form of being released. Over the past decade, I grappled with bouts of depression. I could think of nothing that could exacerbate those struggles more than pretending to live as someone I am not, once again, and turning my back on everything I care about and fight for. Jail and prison exist as an archaic institution hiding the basest stream of dehumanizing and humiliating behaviors by the government, a trail of mounting loss and pain. Here, behind the event horizon, I remain certain that losing the approval, trust, and acceptance of my friends, family, and supporters would make this situation worse. I wish to return home. I want to return to my work, writing, speaking, consulting, and teaching. The idea I hold the keys to my own cell is an absurd one, as I face the prospect of suffering either way due to this unnecessary and punitive subpoena. I can either go to jail or betray my principles. The latter exists as much worse prison than the government can construct. I digress a bit, but the point is, I'm not going to change my mind, not now, not ever, so be it. I declare under penalty of perjury of the laws of the United States that the foregoing is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. Signed, Chelsea Elizabeth Manning.
Absolutely incredible statement. And I was really impressed by her description of the amount of support she's received from people around the world of all different, occupations, nationalities, etc. That was really amazing, because it shows that the propaganda campaign against both Chelsea Manning and Assange has not been complete. It has not been completely successful, and that's good to hear, at least.
That's correct. That is a good point. This average people, different walks of life, can see through it. A lot of them can anyway. Another headline from the week was a busy week. That statement, her release from prison, her impending re-imprisonment. We also saw the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks and Pamela Anderson, the actress, visit Assange at Belmarsh prison. It was the first social visit that Assange has had since he was imprisoned some weeks ago now. Kristen Haffinson I came out of the prison with Pam Anderson and made the following statement. He said, I think I speak for both of us that we are quite emotional after this first social visit that Julian's been allowed after being here for a month. It is to me shocking to see my friend, an intellectual, a publisher, a journalist, a man that has transformed the world of journalism with his work, sitting in a high security prison, spending 23 hours a day in a cell, having a half hour outdoors, if weather allows, and a half hour to do everything else. This is no justice. This is an abomination. Someone said that you could judge the civilization of a society by visiting its prisons. And frankly, I have to say from my heart that this visit did not reflect well on this society here. This must end. This will be a fight. I can say that Julian Assange is bent but not broken. He's an extremely resilient person, and I want you to think about that fact, that such resilience usually comes from the fact that he knows he is innocent. He knows that he has done nothing wrong. He knows that he's being persecuted for the simple fact of doing journalistic work. That should be the message that you should relay to the general public, he told the press.
And then we have a statement from Pamela Anderson, who told the press, quote, "Obviously, it's been very difficult to see Julian, and to make our way through the prison to get to him was quite shocking and difficult. He does not deserve to be in a supermax prison. He has never committed a violent act. He's an innocent person. He hasn't access to a library, computer, or any information. He's really cut off from everybody. He hasn't been able to speak to his children, and public support is very important, and fundraising is very important. He needs all the support he can get. You know, justice will depend on public support. He's a good man. He's an incredible person." She says that she loves him, that she can't imagine what he's been going through, and to see him was good to see him, great to see him, but this is just misrule of law in operation. It is an absolute shock that he has not been able to get out of his cell. It's been 1 month, and it's going to be a long fight. He deserves our support, she says. Quote, "He needs our support, so whatever anybody can do, maybe write to him, encourage him. He's appreciative of any support that he's received. I think he hasn't received too much in the way of letters, but I know people have been writing," she says. "It's a process for him to have any kind of communication. It's very difficult, and we just have to keep fighting because it's unfair. He has sacrificed so much to bring the truth out, and we deserve the truth. And that's all I can say. I'm sorry. I feel sick. I feel nauseous." So maybe a couple of questions, if there are any questions. And before we go on, I just want to add that I think, probably equal to the impact that her statement alone had, in the video of Pamela Anderson making these statements, it really was very clear that she was shocked and in shock, and had been deeply affected by seeing Assange and the process of Belmarsh prison. So I think that's just as important to take into account as the statement that she made. And then we have a question from a journalist who asked, what sort of condition is Julian in? And Kristen Hafrenson answered saying, quote, "He is not in, of course, you have to take into account the years and years that he was in the appalling conditions at the Ecuadorian embassy, especially the last year, where he was basically harassed every day and everything was done to make his life there miserable. So, I mean, he is, as you could see in the court, he had lost weight, but his spirit is strong. That's the most important thing." And we told him about our feeling that there's a growing support among the general public, and he was heartened to hear that, and that's given him added strength. It gives him added strength.
Another journalist asked this question: how tough is he finding it in Belmarsh? Obviously a high security prison where he's shut in his cell for 23 hours a day. What's that like? Kristen Hafrenson said what it is like for anybody to be in Belmarsh prison, especially when you are there because another country demands your extradition for journalistic activity. It's outrageous. Another journalist asked, technically he's there for skipping bail. That's why he's there. Kristen responded, technically he's there under conditions for seeking asylum, which is an international right. If he was simply serving that time for skipping bail, he would be allowed more visitors. He has not been able to properly prepare his case, which is, of course, the most important fight against extradition to the United States.
And then we have another journalist saying, of course, the news came out this morning that the 2 Reuters journalists were freed in Myanmar, which a country which ranks 137th on the World Press Freedom Index. So why is it that Myanmar can free 2 journalists, but the UK finds it so hard to free Julian Assange? And Hafrenson responded saying, well, that's a good question. You should probably ask the UK government why that is. And the same journalist who asked the question regarding Myanmar said, quote, "Can you say how well he actually is about facing a potentially long sentence in the US. And Pamela Anderson said in response, quote, "We have to save his life. That's how serious it is." And Hafrenson added, "It is a question of life and death. That's how serious it is. Thank you."
Powerful statements there by both of them. On the following day, Thursday, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture visited Julian Assange in the prison. As you might recall, he was planning to see him at the embassy, but unfortunately, Julian Assange's address changed in the meantime. So he went to see him in the prison on Thursday, and afterward he came out and spoke to the press. He did not give a substantive statement, but there are clues here and some news. He said, "The concerns I've expressed with regard to a possible extradition of Julian Assange to the United States, where I fear that he might be exposed to serious violations of his human rights. We are here upon the invitation of the Ministry of Justice of the UK, and I would like to thank the Minister of Justice for having facilitated this visit and also for having arranged meetings with the Belmarsh prison authorities this afternoon, and also some other authorities tomorrow, which would be today, Friday. I will also be meeting with other interlocutors all day tomorrow to try to come to an assessment as to the risks of torture and ill treatment that Mr. Assange might be exposed to. I am not at this point making any statements about the observations I have made. I will first communicate to the British authorities, and then also, because this is a very important case, inform the public about my findings. We have been able to talk to Mr. Assange in private this morning and to conduct an initial medical assessment. And we will continue to see him for another 2 hours this afternoon and then meet with some other authorities. This is the first time we've heard of him having seen a doctor. And he had a medical examination. We don't have the results of that visit. Hopefully soon the Special Rapporteur will make a statement.
Absolutely. And we also have news regarding the Swedish prosecutor who is to announce her decision on Monday. We have Sweden's state prosecutor announcing on Monday whether she will reopen a preliminary investigation into a rape allegation against Assange. The WikiLeaks founder is in prison in Britain after he was arrested last month after 7 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The US wants to extradite him in a case relating to WikiLeaks' massive release of sensitive military and diplomatic documents. Sweden's legal tussle with Assange has dragged on for nearly a decade after he was accused by 2 Swedish women of sexual assault and rape in 2010. The statute of limitations ran out on sexual assault allegations in 2015, and the prosecutor dropped the investigation into the rape allegation in 2017 because Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy, where he had taken refuge to avoid extradition. But that was also, he took us, just as an aside, he sought asylum in order to protect himself from persecution by the US and the UK, not to avoid questioning by the Swedish authorities. So the returning to the news article, though, the prosecutor said at the time that the investigation would be reopened if the situation changed. After Assange's arrest last month, the lawyer representing the woman who accused Assange of rape asked the investigation to be reopened.
At a press conference, the prosecutor will announce her decision, which will formally be made immediately before that press conference, the Swedish prosecution authority said in a statement, and that is on Monday, next Monday, this press conference. Assange, who denies the allegations, fought through the British courts to get the extradition order and preliminary investigation dropped. His lawyer said he feared that should he go to Sweden, authorities can hand him over to the US to face prosecution over the WikiLeaks case. You're absolutely right to point that out, Elizabeth, that he didn't run away to the embassy because he didn't want to face the music in Sweden about the allegations of rape or sexual abuse, because indeed he was in Sweden. They let him go. He went to the UK. Then they put out a red notice for Interpol, and that started his long, tortuous relationship with the law, first under house arrest. And then when his appeals not to go to Sweden were exhausted, he went to the embassy because Sweden would not give the guarantee that they would not extradite him to the U.S. for what we now know they were telling the truth about his prosecution, most likely under the Espionage Act. But not if Chelsea Manning has anything to do with that, since they clearly need her testimony to bring that about. At least it seems that way. So Assange, this case in Sweden could be reopened on Monday. There were 70 British MPs on the day, I believe, of Julian's arrest on April 11, wrote to Theresa May, the Prime Minister, saying that, he should be sent back to Sweden. Sorry?
No, I was just going to say that, I think this article really does kind of drop the ball in some sense, in the sense that they don't talk about the fact that Assange offered multiple times and made every effort to, basically be available for Swedish authorities to question him in the embassy in London. They refused to do so for years. And in fact, we know, thanks to the amazing reporting of Stefania Marizzi and her efforts to basically filing FOIAs and going through litigation to try and get access to documents relating to this whole mess. Through those documents, we know that the British authorities actually pressured Sweden to keep this investigation open longer. They were ready to drop it in 2013, and they pressured them to keep it going until 2017. So there's a whole lot of information out there that most press reports do not give you that context. So it's important to give. Yeah,
that's right. They're horrible.
Yeah.
In fact,
put it lightly.
I don't know. Didn't put on here, unfortunately, where I will try to find out what the source of this was. It could have been a Reuters or AP story. But no, there's unbelievable mistakes made, Elizabeth. They routinely say he was charged with a crime already in Sweden. He was never charged. They don't explain why he went in the embassy. They say he was running away. And these things are just accepted, and they
absolutely
repeated.
And the lies of omission are just as bad as the incorrect framing of the situation, for sure.
Right. Normally, crimes of omission in the press is how they do things. But in this case, there are out-and-out fabrications of lies that are repeated. Whether the individual reporters know that or not, they just regurgitate what they've heard, so that there's this assumption that he's been charged, that he's a rapist, and all the other garbage that we've heard. And that he's hacked into the American computer, because that's what the press release of the Department of Justice said, not exactly what the indictment says. At least the word hack is not in there. So this is why we're here, Elizabeth.
Exactly.
Tried to combat all those false reports about Julian Assange, about WikiLeaks, about what this case is really about. It's not about him and his cat and whatnot.
Of course.
I don't know if you saw Zizek's powerful statement this week.
I did. It was amazing. Yeah.
He made it clear this is not about Julian Assange, and he also says that he doesn't need us as much as we need him. I thought that was a clearly very insightful position. We need him because he is shown what journalism is supposed to do, can continue to do in a new way technologically. And this is what the mainstream journalists failing to do, by and large, hold government to account. He publishes that information, he winds up in jail. I mean, it's not as simple as that. This is medieval. This is totalitarian. This is something, decried of the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. This is what the Chinese do. This is what Putin does. This is what, any garden variety dictator or Kim Jong-un, this is what they do to their journalists. We, on the other hand, we're enlightened. We have a free press. That, what I call the pretense of democracy, the pretense of freedom of the press, is going to be shattered right now if they charge him with the Espionage Act. As I've said many times on these vigils, it's on the books in the Espionage Act that all you have to do is receive classified information and not be authorized to receive that, and not be authorized to disseminate it, and you've technically broken that law. It's never been used against a journalist since 1917. Came close a couple of times, never happened. This will be the first time. I fear the Trump administration could be the first one to do this, but there could be worse administrations down the road. If this precedent is set, that they can arrest a journalist for publishing, using that archaic act. As Assange himself said in that 2010 CBS 60 Minutes interview, the United States would become a different country if they prosecute me under the Espionage Act. He said that, and it will go down a dark road, and it will no longer be able to pretend, as it does now and fools so many people, that they are Democrats, small d, and that they are defending liberties around the world, et cetera, et cetera. They will be as bad or worse than any of these governments that they target for regime change.
Absolutely. No, and I think also, just to switch topics just slightly, I think it's important too to return to Chelsea Manning's statement earlier, in the sense that she was describing the effects on her of solitary confinement, and those conditions that she was describing, where she was, separated from the rest of the population, she was alone for many, many hours a day and did not have reading material and that type of thing. That is exactly what then Pamela Anderson and Kristen Haprinson were describing Assange's situation as right now. So while Chelsea Manning has absolutely heroic in her continued stance against this grand jury, and she is going to be, unfortunately, probably re-imprisoned within a week. It's also important to remember that Assange is in that state of solitary confinement now, and has been since his arrest. So I think that basically that Chelsea Manning's statement is important in illustrating the type of effect that Assange's current situation could have on him as well. And I just thought that was something to keep in mind. And we also have a statement from the International Association for Media and Communication Research, and they said that the International Association for Media and Communication Research, or as I'll refer to it in future, the IAMCR, is the preeminent worldwide professional organization in the field for media and communications research, and it expresses concern about Assange's possible extradition to the United States. WikiLeaks was founded in 2006 as an online platform for the secure and anonymous submission of information by whistleblowers on the actions of power holders that would otherwise be concealed from the public view and scrutiny. It has provided vital material for investigative journalists. For instance, in 2010, in collaboration with established newspapers, the New York Times, the Guardian, and Der Spiegel, the documents and field reports it supplied formed the basis for news coverage, revealing thousands of unreported deaths, including U.S. Army killings of civilians in the Afghan and Iraq wars. WikiLeaks releases have played a crucial role in exposing government and corporate evasions and denials, enabling journalists to uphold the public interest. IAMCR is dedicated to defending the principles of freedom of speech and the public right to know. Extradition for Mr Assange, an Australian citizen, and prosecution by the United States government would set an unwelcome precedent that threatens the welfare of whistleblowers and discourages the sustained watchdog role of the media in democratic societies. And that is the statement from, again, the IAMCR, the International Association for Media and Communications Research.
Yet another organization dedicated to freedom of the press, the work of serious journalists, come out in favor of Julian Assange. This is obviously very good news. Committee to Protect Journalists, and then beyond journalist organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, having decried his arrest. Now, that's why those groups weren't necessarily lined up behind Julian Assange before. Many of them, being liberal outlets, may dislike him for the alleged role he had in Hillary Clinton's defeat, blah, blah, blah. But they see what's happening here. They see what line is being crossed here by the arrest of a journalist for publication of inconvenient information to the authorities, unveiling and uncovering their absolute despicable behavior and prima facie evidence of war crimes. They see, whether they like Assange or not, they see this as being a very serious threat to press freedom and the future rather of press freedom. So they're coming out in favor. That tells you something right there. But you know what? I don't think the damn Justice Department, people like Pompeo, give a damn about the statement we just read. Do you think?
Not in the slightest, unfortunately. I think it would be very clear from their actions and statements and their characterization of Assange and WikiLeaks as hostile, a non-state intelligence service and that type of thing. I think that they want to not only destroy WikiLeaks and retaliate against Assange, I think they want to make a clear example of Assange and WikiLeaks, so that to discourage this type of, the type of releases that Chelsea Manning leaked. I think they really want to make sure that they terrorize those who might think of leaking such information in the future.
Now, to me, the most important institution is not the ones we just talked about, but the corporate media itself. How are they covering this story, and how will they in the future? Because if they look at it from their own self-interest, they're going to have to take a very, very critical view of what the government's doing here. They got to understand that their own freedom could be at stake. once they go ahead with using the Espionage Act against the publisher. By the way, a publisher was named a publisher by Attorney General William Barr in the United States on the day of the release of the Mueller report. In his press conference, calls WikiLeaks a publisher. So that's key, because if he's publisher and WikiLeaks is a publisher, they should be afforded the same protections as other publishers. If he's not a publisher, not a journalist, and so many so-called, professional journalists in the corporate media have been saying for years he's not a journalist, he's not like us, he's just dumping stuff out there. And as Bill Keller, the former executive editor of the New York Times, called it, WikiLeaks and Assange, they're just a source. Yeah, not a source that got information from a source. Chelsea Manning. So, what kind of source gets information from? Uses journalistic techniques to get information from source, and then shares what they had with other publications for joint publication. That is, in Bill Keller's mind, he was just a source. Somebody who just called the newspaper with a $5 tip, about some crime down the road. The way the press deals with this issue is key, because they have to see it for what it is. They've got to report it that way. That could change public opinion and put pressure on the government. If they keep serving the state rather than the people, they are screwing themselves. And they will find that out later down the road. They could be subject to the same kind of prosecution. They might think that they are protected because they are big shots and they've got the name. They're the New York Times. They're CNN, and the government will never come after them. Well, I think they should think again. This administration and future ones could do that. So they've got to stand on principle here and look at the facts that the guy didn't help anybody hack anything. And yes, he did break maybe Section E of the Espionage Act by holding on to classified information and disseminating, but so have you, CNN. So have you, New York Times. That's the one they can't allow to go without serious criticism, because that's what put them and their butts on the line as well, because they've all broken that part of the Espionage Act. And we, members of the public, who retweet something that WikiLeaks has published, some document, some classified document, we're breaking it too. It's absurd, that is. Because once we read this on the WikiLeaks site, we are now, and we download it to our hard drives, we are in possession of classified information, and we haven't been authorized. And if we email to our friend, we've now disseminated it. So
it's chilling. It's chilling to consider that. And I think it's also, it is a really sad statement to see the media turn on Assange after, with all of this threat, as you say, that could boomerang back on them. I think possibly, there are individuals within some of these outlets, or who are formally associated with some of these outlets, not every single one, of course, but some of them, for example, the lawyer for the New York Times, who point out that this is going to be a problem for them as well. But I think that sadly, it seems like there's this culture that has grown in the last few years within establishment media sources, where they have become so friendly with the establishment and with state and corporations that I think they do feel as if, well, we're towing the establishment narrative line, so we won't be attacked. And I think that that's a real concern, because Trump is not always going to be in office, and who knows, as you mentioned earlier, Joe, who knows who's going to come next? And 10 years, 20 years down the line, if there's going to be some president who doesn't like what the New York Times publishes and decides, well, we're going to attack you based on this precedent. I think it's short-sighted of so much of the media to look at this as a personality issue of Assange or the 2016 impact of WikiLeaks. It is extremely shallow of them to take this position. And the other reason that I think WikiLeaks poses such a threat, so to speak, to the establishment status quo, is that basically, you look at the history of WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning was not outed, so to speak, as a source for WikiLeaks by WikiLeaks itself. It was through no action of WikiLeaks that her identity was made known to authorities and to the public. It was through a person that she unfortunately trusted with her private information, who then, basically informed on her to the military. So, but you see other outlets like The Intercept who have burned how many sources now? And you never see that happen with WikiLeaks. I think, in my personal opinion, I think that Julian Assange would rather die than give up a source. And so I think that WikiLeaks stands alone in its protection of its sources, in its dedication to that, and to put to the material and the sources first, and their own personal safety second. And I think that there is really no other organization that's like that. And I think that fact alone makes them an enormous threat to the status quo and to the establishment.
Those are excellent points, Elizabeth, about the Intercept. Yes, someone yesterday, Thursday, was outed and arrested for being the source of the drone articles that Jeremy Scahill wrote. It's quite extraordinary that this has happened.
Again, yes.
Intercept. Carelessness, whatever. You're right. WikiLeaks has been locked, very solid in trying to maintain who their sources have been, although Chelsea was outed, and I don't know all the details. Maybe you do around the default 7 suspect, but he has been under arrest. I'm not saying he's the source. He's not been proven to be, but there is an arrest in that case. Just the idea that the government now, they do things that are pretty bad. They do really bad things. They break laws. Maybe they're killing civilians innocently in Iraq, as the Iraq war logs and the Afghan diaries, as you've just written about in Consortium News, amply show. So they do all these crimes, and they got to keep it secret. Like any criminal, you don't want the public to know, or else you're going to be in trouble. So can you imagine if the mafia had classification rules and a law of classification with different levels?
Yeah.
And the police came and said, we need to talk to you about that murder. And they say, well, we'd like to, but classified. Can't talk about it. It's for not national security, for mafia security. So, no, we cannot talk about it. We're worried about the security of the mob, and it's all classified. So the government commits these crimes, and then people come along and can't talk about it, classified. And everybody kind of believes that in the public. This is the government. They're there to protect us. They're there to serve us. We voted for them. They appointed these people and intelligence agencies and all that to serve us, to protect us. I have people tell me that. CIA is there to protect you. Somebody told me. So they commit these kinds of crimes of corruption, and then they classify it. And somebody comes along and leaks it because they realize that this is a huge problem. And they want to, that's like going to the police and outing some bunch of criminals. One of them, the guy inside the mafia, decides he's going to tell the world what happened. He goes to the newspapers, and newspapers don't want it. Like Chelsea went to the New York Times and the Washington Post. They didn't want that story about the collateral murder video and all of that. So she went to WikiLeaks. So somebody exposes the crimes of government. Now government is going after to arrest the guy who was in charge of that journalistic operation. It doesn't get any starker than that. Every other thing about from Hillary Clinton to Fiji's on the wall is total rubbish. This is the core issue here. Journalists who uncovered crimes and corruption of government, and government's trying to lock him away forever because of that, to shut him up and to serve as an example. And if the press doesn't come to his defense right now, we're finished. We're finished even the pretense of democracy is over. And we're living on fumes right now when it comes to whether we're a democratic society. As Zizek also said in that statement, we think we're free. We feel like everything's normal. And this is what's so dangerous, because the manufacturing of consent the manufacturing of this idea that we're still a democratic society, which we've never fully been, by the way, given the history of slavery and genocide of Native Americans and legal segregation in the South and political corruption. We've lived through all of this. But there were instances of journalists who were able to break through. There is this tradition of muckraking. I think I mentioned last week Lincoln Steffens, this very famous journalist in the turn of the 19th to 20th century. This tradition of holding power to account, H.L. Mencken, people like this. We've got this in American journalism. There have been a rare few, who then set the idea, the tenor of what the culture of journalism is supposed to be. And we're supposed to And that has been totally abandoned. And here comes Julian Assange doing what Lincoln Steffens did, muckraking. Right? Whether he wrote it in a hot type print on a newspaper, that had to roll off the press and could be driven around town so people could buy a paper edition, or whether you can read it online right now, that's only a technological change. He's doing the work of the muckraking tradition of American journalism. And they're going to they want to put him in jail for the rest of his life for doing that. This is what we're dealing with here. And I damn hope that the press comes forward and realizes what's going on and have the guts to critically report on this and to talk about it in terms we are here at this vigil.
Absolutely. I think that the lack of, the complacency of the New York Times and many, many other outlets on this subject, I think it really does help reinforce the public sense that all is well, all is normal, that, that we have that pretense of freedom of the press and free speech. I think that, it's definitely been a successful propaganda, probably, not narrative, but basically a matrix of successful propaganda that raises, people in the United States and to some extent around the world to think that American authority has some sort of moral right, moral supremacy over what is done, whether it's, internationally or domestically, on who's arrested, on who is attacked. I think that even when you consider, and this is, I don't mean to get completely into the weeds, but even when you consider, the type of TV shows that we're exposed to for decades and decades, look at things like, the Law and Order series that was extremely long running, and who was the good guy in that? It was always the prosecutor, the police, the people that in reality are perpetrating some really horrible things. Those were always the good guys. They were always trying to do it right, and if they prosecuted someone unfairly, they felt really bad about it. I think that I hate to get into the weeds on that, but I'm trying to give an example of the way in which we are always shown in our media, not just news, but in our media, this vision of sympathy for the people in power and identifying with them as the people that we empathize with. And I think Assange's fight and the way in which the state has retaliated against Assange and WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning is really the best evidence that we have of these crimes that have been committed, in addition to the actual revelation and content of the WikiLeaks publications themselves. In addition to that content, this retaliation itself is evidence as well to back up that content. So I think that people really do have to report on that as much as they can, and it's an absolute travesty that more media outlets are not up in arms about this and fighting back. And I think that complacency and that pretense of a free press and free speech would really be shattered if the really the papers of record in the United States and around the world were to fight back against this. I think that the public would be shaken up, and that may be exactly why we're not seeing that, unfortunately.
I love you bringing up popular culture, that, because that is far more effective to get a message across than the newspapers.
Right.
First of all, it's a fictional show, right? So it's supposed to be fact. That's number one. So you got a wide range of possibilities when you're writing a TV script or something. And, whether these are vetted by the CIA, as many Hollywood scripts are, there's no question about that, or the Defense Department, if they want to use their equipment, let's say, in making a film, a war film, and they want to use some props that come from the Defense Department, well, in exchange, we got to read the script. So there's a long history and a lot of literature on that. But a popular TV show, they're reinforcing certain beliefs, core beliefs about how American society works, and you absolutely put your finger on it there, that the authorities are right. They may screw up, make a mistake once in a while, but their heart's in the right place.
And they're trying their best. And they feel really bad if they make a mistake, Oh,
that's key.
Right.
Yeah, they really feel bad. So, and people like us who are like, we trying to talk about facts and the reality of the situation. And of course, we're seen as being anti-American or party poopers or anything in between. We're commies. How dare we? When we probably love this country in a way more than those people do, because we're trying to save it by talking about these problems. They're going along in la la land, watching these TV shows, but they're so important to create and reinforce the legitimacy of the state.
And power.
Cops and prosecutors are the good guys. Right?
And how many, it's not just law. I mean, how many, we have CSI, we have so many shows like that where we're focusing on law enforcement, we're focusing on prosecutors, we're focusing on the investigators, focusing on the CIA and FBI. You know, back when after 9/11 happened, we had 24, so many media, you know, not just movies, but TV shows and whatnot that are broadcasting that narrative and focusing on that narrative. How many TV shows are there that talk about the people that are attacked by police or that experience, you know, some sort of corruption? There really is almost not much at all. And I think that is, you know, it's a statement about what the focus of the sort of propaganda narratives are, and what the, you know, the assumptions that are kind of encouraged in us from day one of just existing in this country. It's unfortunate.
It goes way back. In the 50s, 60s, there was a program called the FBI, and it was pretty much written by the FBI. I think even Hoover used to appear in a statement before or after the show. I mean, I remember it as a kid at the end. So the FBI was on ABC network, I believe, American Broadcasting Company. And so it's not a new thing that the popular culture has been seen by the state as being a very important way to glue together popular support for, and very often the illegitimate activity of government that has to be legitimized and has to be believed in, or else it doesn't work. That falls apart, they're in trouble. And
yeah, it's the manufacturing of consent, like you said earlier. That's exactly the operation of it.
And more with popular culture than with the newspapers, although they're doing a great job too. Because especially since TV news, cable TV news has become entertainment as well. It's kind of, they're more interested in entertaining and getting their ratings and having a personality out there to bring in the viewers, where they just talk about one aspect of the news, usually the one that's favorable again to the authorities. But on the popular shows, I think really, you know, that is really far more pervasive and more insidious and dangerous. And it has to be constant. There has to be these shows all the time. Now tell me, I don't really watch TV very much at all, actually, especially show. I've never seen CSI or whatever it is. But how are journalists portrayed in these programs, Elizabeth?
I think there are some shows that focus. I don't watch TV much either, especially over the last 10 years or so since the, you know, sort of rise of social media. I think a lot of people have like quit their cable subscription and that type of thing. But I do know that, you know, as I was growing up, you know, in the early 2000s, late 1990s, that type of thing, there were so many, the effect of those TV shows was very successful, because I remember being in classes with people talking about how they had watched CSI and they wanted to be a forensic scientist. Like, it really did make a deep impact on especially children and teens and it's a recruitment tool. So I think that, you know, that you kind of, we might laugh and kind of sit back and say, well, it's pop culture and it's just kind of lowbrow and silly or something, but you can't underestimate that impact. It really does seep into society. And as you mentioned earlier, it creates those assumptions. It gives people that buffer of legitimacy to these institutions, and it allows them to get away with murder, literally, in some cases. So,
yes, and it makes the people of the United States who watch this comfortable, feel safe. If we think our government's out there trying to protect us from the evil Russians or the North Koreans or the Chinese, and they are taking the criminals off the streets, we feel safe. The moment somebody comes along and says, well, wait a minute, this is not the way they're behaving, they're actually doing quite horrible things, especially abroad, that guy's the enemy. He's the villain, the truth teller, the person who is exposing that. That's Julian Assange. He comes along with his WikiLeaks thing, and he's not just getting unnamed sources to tell him things. He's got the documents written by government themselves. Now, the whistleblowers are the unsung heroes in this. Most of them, of course, are unknown and hopefully remain so. And they have had enough, and they've got the evidence, and they turn it over to somebody they can trust, who will publish it, will make sure that it's true, and that they will publish it in its raw form so that everybody in the public, from researchers and historians and journalists, students to an average person, could read it with a search engine, find stuff, millions of documents that of a whole range of things, from financial to war crimes, from private corporations to government. And I mean, this is so counter to what we're just talking about. It breaks that manufacturing of consent. It deconstructs the consent. It undermines the consent. And that consent upon which the entire state apparatus, the whole establishment rests, and so many people who serve the establishment, their lives, their careers. It's like pulling a thread and everything starts to come apart. If you pull out a block that's holding up this edifice of a false understanding of what the United States of America stands for, what it does, what its leaders mean, and what their interests are. It's not their self-interest, of course. They're public servants. Public servants. They don't have careers like, those guys, those bankers on Wall Street, which some people love to hate. And even Elizabeth Warren loves to hate and wants to do something about it. You're going to talk about federal government like that? No. So they cannot allow someone to come and destroy everything they've built up since the Pilgrims first arrived in New England. Built up on the slaves, on the back of the working class. Everybody's back. They can't do that. And if you look at the origin of the CIA, you'll see that almost all these guys came out of Wall Street background. The Dulles brothers, the Angleton, all these people came from Wall Street, and they serve in big banking and interests. And that's what I told that person who said, "No, Joe, the CIA is protecting you." I had to laugh. I said, "No, they're protecting powerful interests where they, this is why they were created. This is what they do. And that if somebody comes along and tries to give the public what they're doing, they got to be stopped." And this is an indictment of the media, because that's what they say they're doing. They say they're protecting the public. We are holding government to account. We're adversarial. Look at Jim Acosta standing up there at the press briefing. And then so they can get away with that BS until Julian Assange comes along and shows that you haven't been doing that. This is what you haven't covered. This is what you haven't learned. This is what you don't have the trust of whistleblowers anymore to do something about it, because Chelsea Manning came to you and you ignored her. So they're coming to me. They're coming to WikiLeaks now. This show that also exposes the media for the huge, major, essential role in keeping that lie of that manufactured consent about what America's really all about, what kind of a country we are. And that's not to impugn individual Americans who could be extremely decent people and that are decent people. We're talking about the state and serving the state and the establishment, corporate state. And the press reinforces those rubbish things every day with the way they report in a different way than the entertainment industry does. And I was just arguing the entertainment industry is even more influential about that. So, there was a short period in the 60s and the 70s that there were Hollywood films very critical of the establishment of the media itself. And, look at All the President's Men. That movie is the one I grew up on. I'd really wanted to be a journalist before that, but certainly I was in university first year or two, and that movie came out that showed how the Washington Post took down Nixon. So it glorified the press as being an adversarial force. But that was such a rare moment in American journalistic history. And for the most part, that's why I asked you how journalists and reporters are portrayed in these TV shows, because they are mostly dealing with cops and reporters and stuff like that, right?
Right.
I would be interested to know if anybody's watching on YouTube who can write a comment. If they are TV watchers, how do a journalist portrayed as what? As good guys, as bad guys, as
doggedly adversarial or not,
Right. But we know the reality. You can't be too adversarial unless you're dealing with a partisan feeding frenzy like we've got going on now, where they just particularly hate one man who's president right now. They palming that off as being adversarial. I can assure you, if Biden were elected, or even a more mainstream, obviously normal Republican guy, a real politician, that the press will go back to the way it covered Obama. Mildly critical at times, but turning down, an incredible, the story of the century with Chelsea Manning was offering them, and they weren't interested. So it'll go back to that. If somebody offered them a trove of documents showing that Trump did something, they would. So you can't be fueled by personal animosity towards a politician. They all have to become under the same scrutiny. God, definitely. The media is so bad in America, Elizabeth. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I just want to kind of elaborate on that point that you made about the way in which the media is reinforcing that complacency. And I think that really is the answer to the question you asked earlier about, well, why isn't the media coming to Assange's defense if this is going to hurt them? I think that they, at some level, at least somebody within those outlets recognizes that they are a tool of maintaining the powerful status quo. So therefore, Assange is breaking up that status quo, and they are not doing that. So therefore, they will not get attacked the way that Assange is being attacked. And unfortunately, that may be correct. But to repeat myself, but when somebody else is in power, when somebody else maybe doesn't like what the New York Times is saying, then maybe it won't be the same way, and they are engaging in setting a really dangerous precedent. But essentially, I think that they feel safe and complacent because they see themselves as gatekeepers and of basically, being complicit in that, enmeshment and reinforcement of these propaganda narratives, rather than an adversary to those narratives.
Absolutely. It could be a second Trump term that does that.
Right, exactly.
By the way, even if there is no prosecution of that, they may not just go ahead with this kind of journalism anymore because it's risky. They could be prosecuted. It just chills people. When you think, if I do this, I could be breaking the law. And you are, again, technically breaking that ridiculous Section E of the Espionage Act by possessing classified information. So you won't do it anymore. Now, already investigative journalism has been gutted over the years. Their budgets have been cut. It's all about TV entertainment right now and celebrity news and all that. But if they get Assange for this crime under the Espionage Act, all bets are off, and another administration can go after them, and they're just not going to take that chance as much as they did. Again, Cy Hirsch has said, I believe, that if they get Assange on the Espionage Act, that's the end of investigative journalism. So they will have accomplished that even without another prosecution of anybody. And as long as they behave themselves, the Times and the Post and these papers, and continue to believe the myths. These reporters grew up watching CSI too, right? They grew up in this culture, so they've internalized that. They believe it. It's always very hard to tell in an individual how much they really believe it, or if they're really smart and they figured it out, how cynical they are to continue to say that because it's good for, number one, my career. I'm not going to risk my family. It's all about, I got to feed my family. So I'm not going to go out there and do journalism and uncover stuff, and break up people's belief in what kind of country we have. Because then we might have what we had in the 1960s, mass demonstrations, people dropping out, not wanting to take part anymore, wanting a wholesale change in the consumerist culture. Bringing the FBI and the CIA and the NSA into account, which the Church Committee then did in the middle of the 70s as a consequence of all of this social unrest, the pressure of the public, was huge. What could happen in America? We have a relatively recent example, 1970s, 40 years ago. This was a tumult here because the whole premises that we've been talking about of what the society rests on were questioned at the highest level, including in Congress. And this intelligence committees actually investigated publicly with public hearings the intelligence agencies and laid before the American public the crimes that they'd committed. That should have changed people's perceptions of America forever, at least American intelligence agencies. And what happened?
Absolutely. And I think as well, it's just as we bring in George Samuli with us to join us, I think it's really, really important to add that, some of these journalists, and not every single one, of course, but another reason that they might be reticent to sort of break down that perception of safety or sort of like a father figure that associated with the intelligence agencies is that some of these journalists they've developed friendships and personal ties with those same members of those agencies and the authorities. They're always anonymously quoting them. They become enmeshed in that structure. And that's another element that if you're an independent journalist or if you're somebody like Assange, obviously, you aren't friends with people that are in the CIA. So I think it's important to remember that position that a lot of these establishment journalists find themselves in. And I'm not trying to be sympathetic to that, but I'm trying to point that out as another factor and why they may feel protected as well as friendly towards those agencies.
Well, in the old days, the average journalist did not have a college degree, came from a working class background. He worked his way up as a copy boy and then city desk and whatnot. And there was, again, that tradition of about Lincoln Steffens and whatnot, of this tradition. Look at Citizen Kane, the film. The rich guy wanting to take on the powerful on behalf of the people. He sold newspapers doing that. But there was this crusading idea in American journalism that's all but gone right now. And this is what Assange has kept alive and why they can't tolerate this. So, George, welcome. Are you in Budapest or in New York?
I'm still in Budapest, yes. How are you?
Well, miserable. Talking about all of this stuff, but we're having a good conversation, Elizabeth and I, and we'll let you in. I don't know how much you heard of it, but
I only heard a little bit. I heard the last couple of minutes. But,
it really brought up some great point about the entertainment industry and its role in creating and continuing the legitimacy of institutions that we now know can commit crimes and do not have the national interest at heart. They have their own interests, but there's this persistent belief by a gullible public that these are people defending us, George. The CIA is defending us. The FBI is saving us from evil Putin and whatnot. Not doing anything for their own benefit, of course.
That's right. Well, you saw the other day when James Comey was interviewed by Anderson Cooper, and Comey explained to Anderson Cooper that it's perfectly okay for the FBI to infiltrate the political campaign of an opposition with its agents, essentially to set up and trap members of the opposition. That it's perfectly okay to smear members of an opposition. And instead of Anderson Cooper just saying, "What kind of a creature are you? You were head of the most important law enforcement authority in the United States, one of the most powerful law enforcement authorities in the world, and you think it's fine to go around essentially entrapping people who have done absolutely nothing wrong?" Instead of that, he carried on with this friendly chat as if, Comey should know what he's talking about. And this is now par for the course. There is a reason why people like James Comey and John Brennan have kind of, quote, journalistic gigs in the media today. Because they're seen as part of the, I suppose, they're regarded as we're truth tellers. We're the people who are out to find out what's going on. Now, these are some of the worst people ever. Just even in terms of what happened during 2015 and 2016. That on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, they were, wreaking havoc and destroying people's lives with a wholly bogus, made-up story about Russia and the infiltration of Russia and Putin. And journalists just seem to be these Anderson Cooper types. Seem to think that this is fine. It is fine to be working alongside somebody like Brennan and Comey and Clapper, who are utter monsters. And this is really quite an extraordinary development. You know, how we have come to this, how we have come to this, that when supposedly law enforcement authorities use these very powerful instruments to destroy people's lives, and the media, which should be the opposition to this, should be exposing this, are more than happy with it. They just go along with it and think that, we're basically batting on the same side. Now, if, let's say, Julian Assange were being interviewed by Anderson Cooper, do you think Julian Assange would be getting this kind of friendly treatment? Do you think Anderson Cooper would be sort of smiling and laughing and, joking around with Comey? No, the atmosphere would be very, very different. And Julian Assange would be treated as the enemy. He's the person that we have got to destroy.
Definitely. No, I mean, that's the converse situation where you talk about, well, journalists have these friendly relationships with members of the intelligence community. And likewise, the intelligence community, as you say, have come onto these shows as if they're almost journalists. It's a real enmeshment of the media, and journalists and media outlets and cable TV channels with the intelligence community that makes it definitely legitimizes the intelligence community and definitely puts them in a spotlight that is unwarranted and unethical, for sure.
Yes, exactly. Because what Comey was outlining, and he kind of blurted this out. I mean, Comey was outlining that what the FBI did was essentially they set up a honey trap for George Papadopoulos. He seemed perfectly happy with it. Anderson Cooper seemed perfectly happy with it. They essentially used some kind of a Western agent to transmit phony information through Papadopoulos that was then used by somebody else who was sent by the FBI or CIA in order to extract that information from Papadopoulos to show that, yes, Papadopoulos is in the business of transmitting Russian propaganda, and then used in order to launch a massive spying operation by the FBI. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. I mean, this is kind of stuff that you would have expected from the KGB in the worst phases of the Soviet Union. And there's Comey, who seemed not to think that there was anything wrong with it. I mean, he thought this is fine. I mean, it's fine. So, well, we were investigating serious allegations of, Russian infiltration. But these allegations were allegations that he himself had introduced into the whole American system. There were no real allegations of Russian involvement. Comey and his pals in the FBI kind of created this phony story with that guy Joseph Mifsud, who was clearly himself working for the Western intelligence services. So Comey kind of created this story that he then used to justify, in turn, of getting FISA warrants or sending in honey traps and so on.
Don't forget the Steele dossier that was
and exactly the Steele dossier that they
by the Democrats, partly written by a Clinton operative.
Mm-hmm.
And when that fell apart, that's when the Mifsud narrative became, the go-to explanation, second explanation for the origination of this whole, FISA issue, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't mean to, kind of do a shameless plug, but I was the first journalist to document and report on Mifsud's ties to Western intelligence. And I think
exactly.
that's really interesting.
You were one of the first. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
And that was the reason that when that I was the first to report on that issue was because Assange, just days before he was cut off by the Ecuadorian embassy from all outside contact with the outside world, he posted a very long thread on that issue and on this, documenting this evidence of Mifsud's ties to the Saudis, to UK intelligence, to all of these different things. So yeah, I think it's that's a great example of this.
That's right.
Amongst the media, with these not questioning these establishment narratives that are completely see-through.
That's right. So the one intelligence service that there's no evidence that Mifsud was ever connected to was the Russian intelligence service. There was no connection. I mean, the media occasionally report, Mifsud and Russia connections. As far as I can see, the only connection was that he once went to this Valdai Club meeting which is simply a foreign policy discussion group that, they meet regularly in Russia, and people from all over the world are invited to it. That's about the sum and substance of any connections he had with Russia. And if he was supposedly this dangerous person, how come Mifsud has never been arrested or anything? I mean,
exactly. How come he wasn't questioned by Mueller? That's a really big question that no one has answered, especially in establishment press. Why was he not brought in for questioning?
That's right. And then remember, Comey again boasted of having leaked classified information, which was basically the record of his meeting with Trump. He boasts of having leaked that to the New York Times because he was such a slimy rat that he didn't want to, he was too cowardly to seek an appointment of special counsel himself. So he leaked it to his pal, who he knew would leak it to the New York Times. Again, this is something he seemed to think that's okay for him, Comey, to do this. In the meantime, as he goes around persecuting others who do these terrible things known as leaking. But apparently it's okay if you leak and you're doing it in order to destroy your political opponents. That's fine. That's sanctioned. I am James Comey. I'm the director of the FBI. And, these rules that apply to these minions like Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange do not apply to me.
And they sure as hell don't apply to Hillary Clinton, of course, either.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And again, I mean, no one is talking about prosecuting James Comey for these leaks. I mean, it's just that's just a given. I mean, no discussion of prosecution there. So I find this just extraordinary. This the way we operate. The idea that whether you have this ruling elite, that the simple rules just simply they don't apply. They enjoy sovereign immunity, like the famous example that the king creates the laws, but the laws don't apply to the king. I mean, that's just absurd because he's the creator of the law. So Comey kind of creates the laws and the law enforcement and the rules that we are all governed by, but these rules don't apply to Comey or Brennan.
Or large corporations or the intelligence agencies. And I think that's really a great point. I think that what Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and these types of whistleblowers and truth tellers have done is they've revealed the extent to which so little progress really has been made since that time, since centuries ago. We assume that we're so enlightened and we have so much progress because we have smartphones and we vote and that type of thing. But they expose the reality that, like you said, there's laws apply to a certain class of individuals, and they do not apply to another class of individuals and corporations, etc.
That's right. That's it. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So since I missed the early part of your discussion, was there any news, any update on anything that on any of the developments? I saw that there was the UN person came to visit Julian at Belmarsh, and I saw a short interview. Is there any further developments on that?
Not at this time. He said that he was not going to release his findings until he could, I believe, communicate them to the authorities first. So he hasn't discussed what his findings were. We also talked about the visit by Pamela Anderson and Kristen Hafrenson to Assange and the way in which basically read their statements out. And we talked, I mean, in going over that again, I just want to say again that, the way that they were both deeply shocked and viscerally, obviously moved was really, I think, just as important to kind of recognize as the statements that they made. And again, we also read the statement by Chelsea Manning that she had released a few days ago, talked about her release from jail. She'll be going back in a week because of a new subpoena. But I think, again, I want to go back to the fact that in that statement by Manning, she was talking about the effects of solitary confinement on her. And she was in that position for weeks. And and that was really illustrative and, it provided important information for supporters of Assange because that illustrates the condition and the effect of the condition that Assange is in right now. And that there is in the short term, there is no indication that he'll be out of that position anytime soon. And it's very concerning. And I think that needs to be taken into account.
Yes.
George.
So, yes, go on.
Are you actually saying that Comey went on CNN and admitted that they had a sting operation to entrap Papadopoulos?
Yes, yes, yeah. That's exactly what he said. And Anderson Cooper asked him about this and said something like, hey, well, isn't this something unusual? And he said, no, perfectly normal. No, nothing to worry about at all. Everything is perfectly fine. So, and it was extraordinary that he kind of blurted this out. He evidently didn't seem to think that there are any repercussions for blurting it out. But again, as we were just discussing with Elizabeth, I mean, he's done this before. He just said openly that he leaked his classified memos to the New York Times for no reason other than to enjoin a change of policy. And he admitted this. And again, there doesn't seem to be any repercussions to this because it was already a long time ago, and I haven't heard of anyone planning any prosecution of Comey. So he evidently doesn't think that he's likely to face any repercussions for anything.
So the level of impunity and the persistence of it has gotten to such a point that these guys think they can go on national TV and admit that they would normally never admit if they thought they could get in trouble. So
that's right. That's right.
It's a positive side of this in a way that he's given us the information that we've been trying to get for a long time. About whether this was set up on Papadopoulos. I still can't believe he did that. I got to go and watch that video. I did not know that.
Yeah, he said, yeah, exactly. And he says they're perfectly fine. No, nothing, no problems at all. Nothing to concern yourself about, And the audience that was there, this was a kind of a nice talk show format with Anderson Cooper. The audience seemed to be perfectly happy with that. Remember, Comey had in the past, again, openly admitted that he sent 2 top FBI people in order to entrap Michael Flynn. Remember, he said that, when he was asked in the same way. So who sent those FBI people to talk to Flynn? He said, oh, I did. And he was like, yeah, I mean, I did it in order to entrap him. I mean, we knew exactly what they had discussed on the phone with Kislyak. There was no reason for this meeting at all. And it was done in order to entrap him. And he was happy. So, yeah, I sent them.
Well, that shows how well the propaganda narratives have sunk into the population that was accepted as all right, that was just business as usual. Yeah, that's insane.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So, and so, time has elapsed, and yet, there's nothing, I don't see any consequences being faced by Comey. I mean, there are many people who are waiting for some huge, devastating report from the Inspector General. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's even when the Inspector General published that report about the handling of Hillary Clinton's emails, it was far from the devastating, humiliating report that it was. I mean, all Comey got was a slight rap on the knuckles, kind of suggesting that he was insubordinate. That's all. That's about as far as he was prepared to go, that Comey was bordering on insubordination. And that's about it. So unfortunately, I don't have any great hopes for this Inspector General report.
Is that the same interview with CNN in which Comey said that if Trump were not president, he would have been certainly indicted for obstruction of justice? Or was it a different interview?
I think that's a different one. This one I was just telling about. I think this was just the other day. I think this other one that you're just talking about, I think that was already a little while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to hover above this partisan divide here, this unbelievably ferocious partisan fighting going on. Because the moment you say one thing or the other, you're immediately branded as part of one camp or the other. And I don't think any of us belong to either one of those camps. To me, neither one of them are legitimate. They're delegitimized in my eyes, the Republicans and the Democrats, for a whole host of reasons over a number of years now. But Barr, who I have no love for, the Attorney General, said that you have to have an underlying crime in order to obstruct justice. And the report was clear there was no collusion with Russia.
That's right.
So he said he had tried to, yes, put obstacles in the way of Mueller and his investigators because he felt that they were preventing him from governing,
right,
doing what he thought his job should be. And maybe
right.
part of that was to try to improve Russian relations.
That's
so there has to be an underlying crime in order for there to be obstruction of justice.
That's right.
What he said. But if you look at the way the Democrats are reacting to this, I mean, I have to tune out because I can't understand anyone where they're coming from. It's so insane and so hysterical. I think it was an obstruction of injustice. And I prefaced what I said because I'm certainly not a Trump supporter. I've known the guy for years as growing up in New York City, could never stand this guy. Complete buffoon and a braggart and whatnot. But there was no collusion, and that was obvious for anybody with half a brain, and even Mueller, who tried to prove it, could not do it.
Mm-hmm.
And now this whole thing about obstruction of, I mean, I don't know what they're trying to get the Attorney General to be contempt of court because he won't, of the Congress rather, because he won't turn over the whole, I mean, I don't know what's going on anymore. It's so absurd. So absurd.
Exactly, because anyone who knows with the most elementary knowledge of law knows that any crime requires two predicates. There has to be the crime itself, the illegal act itself, and intent. If you don't have the illegal act itself, then intent doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's going on in your thought. If you spend your time thinking about committing a crime and you don't commit the crime, then you haven't committed the crime. That's it. You can't be prosecuted for thinking bad thoughts. And that's what they're saying. Oh, well, but Trump thought bad thoughts. But that's it. But he didn't do it. I mean, he could have at any time fired Mueller. I mean, I don't think even firing Mueller would in any way have been a crime itself, because Mueller was his employee. He's the head of the Justice Department, being the head of the executive, and he can fire whomever at the Justice Department. So even if he had fired him, it wouldn't have been a crime. But he didn't. And if you rant and rave and say, God, I'm sick to death of this Mueller, go fire him, that's just nothing. I mean, it's just, it's a president's prerogative to shoot your mouth off. I mean, about Richard Nixon, who was always shooting his mouth off, telling to people, go do this, go do that, bomb them, shoot them, arrest them. In the meaning of that, I mean, just that's what you say. I mean, you're furious at the Oval Office and you vent your frustration. But if Trump really wanted to fire Mueller, he could have himself got on the phone and said, Mueller, you're fired. He didn't. So he said to McGovern, go fire him. But he obviously didn't mean it, because basically Trump didn't do it himself. So therefore he didn't really expect McGovern to do it. So this is so absurd. I mean, what the Democrats are now doing, or the media and their media allies are now doing, is just it's the height of sort of ridiculousness. No, there was no underlying crime, so therefore there was no justice to obstruct. And since he didn't do anything illegal, what his intent was is neither here nor there. We don't punish bad thoughts.
Well, rather than talk about the economic situation, vast majority of Americans who could become bankrupt if they have to go to a doctor, and talk about ongoing perpetual warfare, the Democratic leadership, the centrists, want to talk about Trump and Russia still.
Yes.
And they want this to be the issue. The one that they won in 2016 on. Oh, no, wait a minute. They lost in 2016 on Russia. But they're going to go back to that. They got to keep that alive.
Right. That's a very good point. Yeah, it's a very good point you just
Russia
made. Exactly.
alive. Keep Russia alive. You remember Jesse Jackson? This is keep Russia alive.
That's right.
And we're going to be subjected to this crap for the next year and a half. And I will make a bold prediction. They're going to lose again if they try that.
Of course. You're right. You're right.
Unless some progressives, or at least some nominally progressive guy like Bernie, gets the nomination and makes not Russia the issue, but no health insurance for millions of Americans. These perpetual wars, etc., etc., etc. Wall Street corruption. He could win. And he would have beaten probably Trump last time, except he got cheated out of the nomination. And how do we know that? Because WikiLeaks told us. And where's the head of WikiLeaks right now?
That's right. That's right.
In solitary confinement
exactly.
in a maximum security prison. That's where he is right now,
That's it. Yeah. It's a measure of what a lousy candidate Hillary Clinton was. And we knew she was a lousy candidate. We knew that the Democrats were making an absolutely fatal mistake in nominating her. So it's a measure of how lousy she was that she lost to Trump. And Trump was not a popular figure. The notion that 2016 Trump was stirring the masses or whatever. I mean, Trump was not a popular figure in 2016. But if it was between her and Hillary Clinton, people went for him. I mean, there was just no way 51% of the public was going to go for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it was just, she was carrying so much baggage, the whole of the Clintons era, and then everything that happened after the Clinton era. I mean, so all of the email server and a disastrous stint as Secretary of State. So all of that, she was going to go in carrying all that into the election. And so, the Democrats made the fatal mistake. And instead of acknowledging this ridiculous mistake that they made, they've doubled down on it. And I just don't understand what's going on in their in their minds. Why are they doubling down on this? I mean, instead of thinking, let's put 2016 behind us and put forward a candidate who's going to beat Trump. Still banging on with the Russia thing. Because
the candidate who could beat Trump, it will be pushing policies that undermine their own self-interest and their own elite interest, their own privileges at the head of the top of the Democratic Party establishment. You don't want some guy riling up the public against us.
Right.
We need to go back to Biden. Let's go back to Joe. He's going to solve everything. He's a real regular working class guy anyway. That's what they're banking on, right? The working class, he can come off like Trump did. Mm-hmm. Billionaire, right. He can come off like a regular guy. So we have two phony regular guys maybe in this election.
Exactly, the phony regular guys, like the guy who the working man's friend. So that's why they do the whole lunch bucket Joe thing and say, well, take a look at his policies over the years. When has he ever done anything to support workers' rights? What has he ever done to support organized labor or any issue important to workers? And they put, he's the friend of the working man.
And who said theater was dead?
That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, I remember, just watching. If you go and watch, Biden's speech on the 1994 crime bill, and he's basically using the same super predator racist language that Hillary Clinton used at the same time to support that same bill. He's a Republican light. He's a diet Republican, and I think that what the DNC's support of both Clinton and Biden shows is that they are not the party of the people that they pretend to be, and that revelation is why they have to focus on Russiagate and keep this kind of zombie rumbling down the road with it, no matter that its limbs have fallen off and it can't move anymore, he's still trying to keep it alive. That's
right.
I think they're going to eventually, that whole thing is going to collapse on them. I don't know when, but they can't keep that lie going forever. And I think the progressive side of this are going to have to get power at some point to bring national health insurance, to bring troops home. Otherwise, if you connect yourself to those, that's an ancient regime that's dying right there. And they are clinging to that because they are tone deaf. They don't understand. They don't want to go down that road. And I don't see how they can continue to do that. People are going to be fooled, even if they shut Assange up for the rest of his lives. There's other ways of getting information out there. And people know their own self-interests. Even if Americans aren't as politically well educated as people in other countries might be, they understand self-interest. And they know that these politics, and that's why I think they bought Trump's BS, because he pretended he was going to help them. So, I mean, can you imagine Biden against Trump? Is anybody going to come out to vote? Maybe 10% of the public will vote in that election.
Yes, yeah. Who can do more for the credit card companies? Who can screw working people more? It's to get the debt collectors, banging on their door. Let debt collectors. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the idea that this is, two regular working class guys, battling it out for the soul of the working man. It's funny, Joe.
Yeah, well, the FBI director is saying openly on national TV that we conduct a sting operation to frame Trump, basically, as a Russian asset.
Yeah.
They can't keep getting away with this. They've lost their minds because there's no pushback against that. He can get away with saying that, but will that last forever?
Right.
I just wonder when
they're digging their own graves. Tell me.
Yeah. Go on, Elizabeth. You were saying.
I was going to say, I wonder when we're going to finally see people basically have some sort of equivalent movement, when compared with something like the Yellow Vests in France. And I say that because, no matter what political, background you come from, people are dying because they can't afford their insulin. People are dying when they commit suicide because they didn't get a prescription of their, antidepressant medication refilled. I mean, people are seriously suffering. They've got cancer and they can't afford treatment. When are we going to collectively do something about this? Because I think, as we've been saying, what the Democrats have been doing is betraying all of their supporters repeatedly and just deflecting that fact onto the whole Russiagate scandal. And,
right.
Basically Comey and whatnot, covering for them and all engaging in this giant charade. As Joe said, theater is alive and well. I hope that at some point that regardless, I think the Democratic Party is dead in the water, but I hope that the people of the US and around the world will wake up and actively go to the streets and do something about this, about the mess that we're all in. So.
That's a very good point. And it is astonishing, just what you said, that here we have a situation in which there is so much to attack Trump on. Trump goes on about this great economy. Oh, the economy is going well. Look at how pay is going up. Well, how much are costs going up? How much are healthcare costs going up? And how much are housing costs? Who can afford to live, anywhere, in sort of New York area, in the California area? No one can afford to live it. So these things have been going up enormous amount over the years. While pay has slightly gone up in the last couple of years. We don't even know how long that's going to keep going. So you could attack him on that and saying, well, yeah, pay's gone up by 3%. In the meantime, healthcare costs are through the roof. Student debt costs are through the roof. Exactly. And in the meantime, you're spending this huge amount of money on the military. The defense budget is going through the roof, but there's no money for anything else. No money for any public works programs or anything else. And then you're conducting this reckless foreign policy that you said you wouldn't do, the very thing you actually promised you wouldn't do. There is so much to attack him for, and what do? Putin.
Rachel Maddow.
What has Putin got to do with anything?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know that some of our viewers don't live in the US, so maybe they haven't personally experienced like the devastation of families that don't have proper healthcare. A lot of in Australia or in the UK or in Canada, that is not an issue that happens. But it's almost like the United States empire overseas in international affairs will go and bomb and steal the natural resources of so many different countries. But then in the United States, that same empire is also draining its own citizens dry. And as you say, the taxes are being used for that continuance of empire and not for, fixing bridges that are falling down and all of that type of thing. And I think that core kind of corruption is something that people outside the United States don't see until it's reported by like the United Nations General Inspector going to San Francisco and Los Angeles and seeing the homelessness there and that type of thing.
Right. And the fantastic inequality that goes on, because you can keep in mind, San Francisco and Silicon Valley are actually one of the wealthiest places on the face of the earth. So all this homelessness and feces on the streets and syringes on the street, all these terrible things are happening next door to where the richest people in the world live. That's a sort of reflection of today's America, that this sort of thing just goes on.
Definitely. Yeah, no, and I think that, again, there's that, because I grew up in Australia, and in Australia there was this perception that everyone in the United States was rich and lived in Los Angeles with these giant houses and the whole Paris Hilton type of lifestyle. And it's just, the reality of the United States is that those people exist, but they're the vast minority, and that the majority of people are also being stolen from and are suffering because of the empire that the US has built. But
well, the real job of the president is the front man for empire.
Exactly.
Yes. Trump does a terrible job at that. He's really bad at that. That's why they hate him, because as soon as he starts bombing somebody, that's when they praise him, right? But if he's going to go on talking about NATO is obsolete and Russia should be our friend, wow, well, right. Can't let him get away with that.
That's it. Yeah,
you can't let him get away with stirring up the crowds against the establishment because of how they're getting screwed economically. Except he was a fraud about that, and I don't think they're necessarily going to get away with it as much this year, this election cycle, I should say, in 2020. I think there's a good chance that if not this 2020, then in 2024, if things continue to go the way they are, especially if there's another Wall Street meltdown, which everyone's predicting, which Trump, as you pointed out, George, talked about, oh, the economy is going. Nah, the Wall Street numbers were going up. That's what he considers the economy. That is not only volatile, doesn't show real wealth, doesn't reflect real wealth, but it only impacts a minority of people.
Right.
Even if people have pension funds and all that. I mean, it's only a minority of people who are temporarily benefited by those high things. Right. And, I don't doubt that there could be another crash that would come just in time to hurt Trump in this election. I think people up on Wall Street can indeed orchestrate things by shorting a lot of stuff, maybe enriching themselves when the time comes to pull the plug. So I wouldn't be surprised if Trump is going to no longer have his Wall Street numbers to boast about in the lead up to the election. Then they're risking, though, a popular backlash to that. Everybody accepted, for the most part, that they lost their homes, that they were ripped off, and that the bankers were bailed out while they got screwed. But the second time around, that was before Bernie Sanders, too, the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, the Trump phenomenon. Now, if it happens again, how will people react?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I thought in 2008 it was touch and go. I mean, I thought that there was such anger in 2008. I mean, it's like it swept Obama into power. But it just turned out that Obama was just simply the smooth front man for Wall Street, pretended to be the tribune of the people, out to avenge the depredations of Wall Street. And then there he was. He just carried on the same policy, which was bailout for Wall Street, but no bailout for the mortgage holders. So it's that famous joke about, capitalism for thee, but socialism for me. We the rich, we enjoy the government bailouts. You, however, will get no government bailouts. You're out on the street.
But Obama played the role. Theater is alive. It's not only alive, it's the theater of the absurd that's alive. But how long will people continue to believe in that? As long as the corporate media continues to create and underpin the legitimacy of this system.
Right.
But they have limited resources to do that too. I mean, after a while, people are not believing what corporate media is doing. They're believing what's in front of their own eyes.
Right.
You see, the more distress the society comes under, the less successful that story becomes. That we're all in this together, that we're protecting your security, that you got to believe in your leaders, and then the CSI model there, the prosecutor's always right. That starts to break down when that's what they're saying on TV, but I don't believe it anymore because my life is not like this.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I'm curious now about the fate of Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, so far, her campaign hasn't yet taken off. But she's saying very radical things, far more radical than anything Trump said in 2015 and 2016. I mean, there was an interview with her. Glenn Greenwald did an interview with her, I think, a couple of days ago, in which she said, essentially, we are subsidizing Al Qaeda. We're not fighting Al Qaeda. It's a fraud that the US is fighting Al Qaeda. We are basically bankrolling Al Qaeda, and we're preventing others from defeating Al Qaeda. She's absolutely right. No one has said this. I mean, this is very radical stuff. If her campaign starts to get traction, you watch the kind of smears that are going to be unleashed against her. You know, nothing like similar. So I mean, all this thing. Oh, she's an apologist for Assad. It's going to be far worse than that. You know, they're going to be digging up the worst, slimiest, most scurrilous possible innuendo about her, and they will destroy her. I mean, it's so. At the moment, you know, she's not really registering, but she could. I mean, you know, her campaign could yet take off, and then, you know, they will destroy her.
I think she would also.
Trump himself will take part in that destruction.
No, I think she would also get the Bernie Sanders treatment, and what I mean by that is that they would also do, in addition to the maybe sporadic horrible hit piece, they would also just have a media blackout and not cover her campaign, and which was, you know, in 2016, that's what we saw happen to Bernie Sanders. Meanwhile, they were focusing how much free airtime on Trump day after day after day. And so I think that would be, and I think that was more damaging than any smear they published to Sanders, and I think that would be more damaging to Tulsi than anything else, in my opinion.
Well, that's what they're doing now. I mean, now they're at the moment they're ignoring her. So her only real presence is on the internet. But that could change, because, you know, the internet is quite powerful. You know, that's a lot of people get the main information from the internet. So she, you know, her campaign could really take off. I mean, she's in the debates, so she's going to take part in the debates. So people are going to see her in the debates, and, you know, if she starts saying these things, you know, what are all the other Democrats going to say? What's Kamala Harris going to say to that? What's you know, O'Rourke and Biden? You know, what are they going to say when she starts? You know, they're going to attack her as another Putin apologist. Well, they probably will.
No, I think they will just laugh at her and try not to take it seriously, and make sure that Anderson doesn't ask too many questions of her. Just sort of, she becomes on the side of the stage and gets one or two questions, and there's no follow up, and like she's a nut. You know, she's just a nut. That's the way they'll treat her.
All right. And the kind of hostility. I think she was on, you know, whenever she does get on mainstream media, she gets, you know, the usual kind of hostile treatment. Again, very different from the fawning that that is bestowed on Comey. I mean, she gets the hostile treatment. Are you really saying that we are aligned with Al Qaeda? What kind of a nut are you? That, you know, that type of question.
She's a nut who served in Iraq in the U.S. military. She's got the credential that normally would be, you know, ironclad when you're running for president. She could talk about foreign affairs and military matters because she was in the military. How many of the others have been chicken hawks have been in the military?
Absolutely.
That was somehow, she's a dangerous woman, George.
Oh yeah.
It's very dangerous if that message catches on.
Yes.
That cannot happen. And the media will do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. But as you say, there's the internet. I could tell you that Tulsi Gabbard's private account has been following Consortium News for a year now.
Okay.
She's retweeted our articles. So she's reading this. She's getting it from somewhere.
Well, she is.
Go on.
I was going to say, I've just been really impressed with the way that Tulsi has interacted with the public, you know, whether it's, you know, retweeting and following Consortium News or talking to, in person, you know, progressive activists and independent journalists like Nico House. I mean, she's really been on the ground and not this, you know, kind of high and mighty politician like some of the other Democrats that we see in the field, you know, standing on cars and countertops talking down to the public. She really seems very grounded. So.
That's right. And she's thought about these issues. Unlike Trump, who I think just blundered into them in 2015. I mean, he hadn't really thought about it. He probably said, oh, yeah, NATO's ripping us off and China's ripping us off and everyone's ripping us off. I don't think it ever really was any deeper than that with Trump. With her case, I think it's very different. I mean, she's really thought about it. and so she'll be able to debate, the issues much more, firmly than Trump, because Trump, as soon as he starts debating, he just starts meandering and just going on and on about irrelevant things. But I think she's thought about these for herself, and I think if she gets on the debate stage, she makes a good account of herself, her campaign could take off. I mean, there's no question, because there's no one really as a front runner. I don't believe all the stuff about Biden as the front runner or anything. I think Biden's rubbish. He was rubbish in '88 when he was caught plagiarizing. He was rubbish in 2008 when he was knocked out of the way by a neophyte like Obama. I mean, so the whole idea that he's just this, the front runner, that that he's just going to blaze away with the title. I don't think that's going to happen.
But George, the DNC is not going to let Tulsi Gabbard get the nomination. We have seen the playback book already. It was from WikiLeaks. We saw what they did with Sanders, keeping the debates on a Sunday night, giving the questions in advance, strategy where you could call him an atheist, all those kinds of things that the emails revealed. They are going to do this again, and hopefully somebody leaks it to WikiLeaks again, and we see how they're screwing Tulsi this time instead of Bernie. And of course, the Russians have done it. They're already telling us Russia's going to hack the next election.
Yes, of course.
Either side who loses, whoever loses is going to be able to blame Russia.
Right.
That's the new convenient way.
That's right. That's right. Even as we speak, the NSA has found out that Putin has given out orders for his minions in America to hack the election in favor of Tulsi Gabbard. I'm quite sure we'll soon be reading this article in the New York Times, that we have it on high authority from the NSA that Putin has handed out this orders, comes directly from Putin himself. We want Tulsi Gabbard, and you guys bring us Tulsi Gabbard.
And Putin is going to visit Belmarsh prison with a thumb drive.
That's it.
Right.
Personally deliver it.
Well, we've already seen them label her as somebody who's what I think it was something like regurgitating Kremlin talking points, aligning herself with Kremlin, narratives. So they're already trying, but I'm sure that there'll be some sort of conspiracy theory about her and Putin coming in at some point. But I think it's also really heartening to see that Tulsi Gabbard has openly, unlike Bernie Sanders, but along with people like Mike Gravel, she has actually come out and supported Assange and WikiLeaks in public.
Yes,
and that is groundbreaking. And I'm really appreciative of the fact that she was willing to do that, knowing no doubt that it would result in a huge backlash in the media against her.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think she's taking huge risks. And at the moment, I think there hasn't been too much of an attack against her, because the official media view is that she doesn't have a chance. So we don't have to worry about her. But if she starts really creeping up in the polls, and then she suddenly is up there with the leaders, then that's the moment when they're really going to go into an attack. And as I say, I mean, I'm pretty sure that the attacks will be of a sexual nature, and I'm sure that there'll be something along the lines that, in college, one of her boyfriends was a Russian who was known to have GRU connections, and that's probably where she picked up most of her ideas.
Don't give her ideas, George.
Well, we've got to expect them. It's like Francis Boyle. You always expect the worst. And then you'll get pleasantly surprised, I hope.
That is the way that I've tried to look at things too, because you don't, the over-optimism and too much hope can really be damaging, because it can pacify people. And I think that's something that we definitely also seen in terms of, a large section of the not the establishment, the right wing and the conservatives in the United States have been really swayed into being pacified by some of their conspiracy theories regarding Trump and his intentions towards Assange.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, this nonsense that this is all a plan to bring him back to the U.S. so that he will reveal Hillary's crimes. Oh.
Exactly. As if he will get an open trial with a jury. You know, I mean, completely ridiculous, honestly. But
they're so certain that they're right about that. That's the scary part.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Yes. Conservative denseness is quite amazing. I mean, they've convinced themselves that and I guess they're taking their lead from Sean Hannity, that somehow the Russians were colluding with the Clinton campaign and using the Steele dossier in order to feed disinformation about Trump into the American political system, because I think the Russians, for some reason, wanted to destroy Trump and secure the election for Hillary Clinton. I mean, the theory is ridiculous, but I guess it takes care of many birds with one stone. Russians are bad, so they're obviously on the bad things. The Clintons are bad, so they're on it. So you put two and two together. Therefore, the Russians and the Clintons must have been in on it, using the Steele dossier in order to destroy Trump. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And WikiLeaks, of course.
And WikiLeaks is part of it as well. And that's interesting coming from Sean Hannity, because if you remember, Hannity was actually rather pro Julian Assange for a while. He thought that Julian Assange had nasty information about the Clintons. I mean, you remember Hannity actually flew to London and visited Assange in the embassy more than once, I think. And but he now he's dropped him as a hot potato. Presumably now he seems to think that Assange was working for the Russians. I don't think Hannity has ever said that part of it, but I guess maybe that is what he thinks. He certainly said nothing about Assange at all since Trump became president.
Well, that's why, even though we welcome anybody who supports WikiLeaks, we have to, I think, personally, do have to look at their motives. And if it's purely partisan, like it was in that case,
yes.
Or Trump saying, I love you, WikiLeaks, and now who's WikiLeaks? People are not, they're not supporters of Assange. They're enemies of somebody, and for a moment, they thought that WikiLeaks was aligned with them against a common enemy, and that they would use WikiLeaks. But that principle of freedom of the press, of exposing the crimes of government, of all the things we were talking about and have been talking about on this thing, I don't think people like Hannity are interested in that.
No.
They want to defend the state, So
I
don't buy his support of WikiLeaks. I never bought Trump's nonsensical statements about that. We got to stick to people who are.
Pompeo, I think, also spoke well of WikiLeaks before the election. When he was still a congressman, he was a big WikiLeaks fan.
Who's that?
Mike Pompeo. He was a congressman. I think he also spoke out well in favor of WikiLeaks. That's right. So as long as they thought, hey, this is great, WikiLeaks is really damaging the Clinton campaign. They're all, I love WikiLeaks. Was it, how many times did Trump say this? On like 43 times during the election. He said, I love WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks. So, that's not to say, by the way, that there aren't Republicans or people on the right who are legitimately concerned about press freedom. There are. Of course there are. And those people, I personally welcome their support of Assange and WikiLeaks. And we've had some of them on the show. But those people like Hannity or WikiLeaks Trump, please. These are not WikiLeaks supporters.
I think Hannity is actually deleted, and I may be wrong if chat can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that I heard that Hannity had actually deleted all of his old content regarding Assange from his website. So, I mean, it goes beyond just not covering it. I mean, they were actively covering their asses on this one. But also, I just want to say that I was looking through chat while you all were having that discussion, and one person asked, other than getting into the streets and other than asking our politicians to make a statement in support of Assange and act in support of Assange and WikiLeaks, what can we do? And I know that we address this almost every week, but I thought I'd still, reflect that question back to us. People do want to support, some of them don't know how to support. And I think One answer to that I saw earlier today on Twitter as we were getting ready to start the vigil, I believe it was Quinn Peterson on Twitter, was taking articles from Consortium News on the WikiLeaks series, was printing them out and was going to take them to the tiny libraries around their city to place them in these libraries. So I think that, be creative and try and think of things like this to, act in solidarity in ways that get the message out there and kind of, circumvent traditional media methods, in addition to social media activism and that type of thing.
Well, that's a great thing. And what you're saying is, since it's going to come from the people, the protest, the ideas have to come from them.
Right.
They look to us, a couple of people here on this vigil, to come up with a menu of things to do, particularly since I don't consider myself an activist. I'm a journalist, so it's not really my role to suggest what to do. And I'm just bereft of those kinds of ideas. That's a great idea. It would never have occurred to me.
Yeah, me either.
Unleash your own creativity about what to do here. There's so many different things that could be done, and those answers and ideas have to come from the public, and we could transmit what they are, as you just did, Liz, by reading this chat. So people got to just use your head to come up with something.
I agree. And I mean, you could just simply hold a protest outside Belmarsh prison. I mean, even if only 3, 4, 5 people show up, it has an effect. I mean, someone brings a megaphone, and people get to speak, and do it like we do this, once a week. Do this as once a week, or do it, once every 2-3 days. Just show up outside the prison. 3, 4, 5, 6 people, and it means there's a constant presence. There is a constant pro Julian Assange demonstration outside the prison. So that therefore people become aware of this. I mean, I think that's a lot of these things can be done. So you don't need a huge demonstration with thousands of people showing up. I mean, that's difficult. That's hard to pull off. But something regular, yeah, absolutely.
Also, I know the amazing graphic designer Somerset, that you can find on Twitter at Somerset Bean, BEAN, has produced amazing material that is available for free. There's no copyright to worry about. You can print out posters of his designs or their designs and place them, on corkboards around your city and coffee shops. I mean, that type of thing does, I think, make a difference. We saw those amazing vans that were driving around DC and London with, free Assange, free Chelsea Manning, or what was it, free speech except revealing war crimes. I think that made a big impact. But if, obviously we can't all drive giant vans around or afford to support them, but we can put that artwork into our community.
Who designed that famous thing with the mouth? Who was that? Who did that?
I'm not sure if that was Somerset Bean, but I know that artwork that was on the vans was by Somerset Bean.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. That's a really good design. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. They're very talented, and they obviously have their heart in the right place. So, yeah, and I think they also have like infographics that a lot of times WikiLeaks and the Defend Assange account will share that have like relevant, how many days he's been imprisoned, how many days he was in the embassy, and that type of information that can be useful in talking to people, and you can print it out and that type of stuff. So that's another idea. And as Joe said, though, we are not able to, tell you exactly what you can and cannot do or what you should do. We are not the only font of information on that. And I think that one thing we could do as co-hosts of this vigil is, maybe start like a Twitter thread or, a personal blog post of just ideas that we see around that have been given to, that we see on social media, like a Twitter thread of ideas that supporters and activists have had, just to get it out there to more people.
Yes, yeah. What about I don't know how this can be done, but just transmitting that to at least all of the presidential candidates. I mean, just at least get it to them. I mean, I'm sure they're not going to make use of it other than Tulsi and Mike Gravel, but I wonder whether this can just be sent to Sanders and Kamala Harris and whatever. Here's this information, use it. Something like that. Can that be done?
Yeah. Maybe, well, what you could do, just as an idea, you could photograph your own letter to them and post that on social media to let people know that you've sent it. And you could also go, if you're in DC or somewhere similar, you could go to their offices and knock on the door and try to, to talk with them about it. But I don't know not everybody's in DC, not everybody can do that, but at least, you can send letters, you can send emails, you can do phone calls, you can record those phone calls and put them on the internet. You can be creative in how you show that you've contacted these people and what their response or lack of response is.
They ought to send those emails to the executive editor of the New York Times,
right,
Washington Post, and the president of CNN, because that is where I think this battle is being fought myself. With the media, they've got to see their own self-interest is at stake, and they have to realize that Assange has embarrassed them because they're doing he's doing the job, he's done the job that they failed to do. But that if he's arrested, if he's prosecuted under the Espionage Act, they are in big trouble from this horrible president that they hate, but maybe even more horrible presidents to come once that precedent is set. So I think getting the media on board here, a couple of good editorials.
I know some letters to the editor have been successfully published in local papers. So if you can write a letter to the editor in your local paper and submit it, it may not always get in, but I know that it has gotten in a couple of times in a couple of different papers. So it's another option.
Down in Arkansas, those papers down there?
Not personally in mine, but I've seen some activists successfully get their letters in. Not in Arkansas yet. I can make an attempt to do that myself and see what happens. Let you all know how it goes.
Well, I mean, funny enough, I was half joking because the local papers in smaller communities, not New York City and Washington, D.C., could be very important because this is where people live and where their interests are really at stake. The interests of the powerful in New York and Washington, I say to appeal to them because the media has a huge self-interest in this. And they are aware of it because the general counsel of the New York Times is aware of it. And he said it months ago. So the thing is they have to be pushed. They have to be pushed somehow to do their jobs, and that is to protect their own interest and the public's interest and Assange's interest. And if they do that, that could be the change right there. The pressure has to be on the government not to fall through. But I fear for the worst, obviously, that they're going to get him on this superseding indictment unless Chelsea Manning holds all the cards here. That they need something from her to get him on that, except if they go for the possession and dissemination of classified information, which they could get him on right now. And that's when the media would be really put up against the wall to have to take a stand.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is very interesting, this recent indictment of this guy, Hale, is that it? Daniel Hale, yeah. It's sort of interesting that the suggestion within the indictment is precisely what the suggestion is between the relationship between Manning and Assange, that there was collusion going on between but the one we guess it is the guy from The Intercept. What's his name again?
Jeremy Scale.
Jeremy Scale, yeah. Because they were saying something like, though Jeremy Scale and he were kind of working on his resume and to use his resume, Hale's resume, to get a job as a government contractor, which would mean that essentially Scale and he were planning for him to infiltrate some, government secrets position and use that in order to extract secrets for The Intercept. Because it's in the indictment that Scale and Hale worked together on his resume, and to get that resume into the hands of government contractors, because Hale wanted a job in one of these government contracting positions. So the fact that it's in the indictment will show that this is the U.S. is planning this as a regular kind of a theory in order to go after journalists, which is, hey, you're colluding with your source in order to persuade him to commit felonious acts, which is to steal secrets.
Right. That's really interesting, George. I had not read the indictment. I did not know that. That is very, very troubling. It's right down the same alley.
Exactly. That's why they brought this up, the thing about the resume. That, they were discussing his resume. They worked on his resume together to send it to, to enhance his employment prospects. in a position for a government contractor, thereby he would be extracting information from these government contractors into the hands of the intercept.
This shows you how things have changed because, as I pointed out before, Robert Parry, the founder of Consortium News, wrote in December of 2010, about a month after we learned that the Obama administration wasn't investigating Assange, that he admitted in a piece that I recently republished that he encouraged his sources to break the law if necessary, to get the information that would expose a much larger breaking of the law.
Right, of course.
That's what we see here. The drone program and the way it's being used for extrajudicial killings is far worse than any tampering with getting a source to get a job, to go inside, to be able to expose this.
That's it. Exactly.
So if Parry could write that openly, I think he wrote that, 2010, and he feared nothing, apparently. Not only because he was a courageous guy, but he was able to write that he encouraged his sources to break the law. And now, 9 years later, in the indictment, does it name Scahill by name?
No, I don't think. No. I mean, everyone has. There's a reference to the journalist, and then everyone else has figured out that that's obviously Scahill.
Reporter One or something like that.
Something, yeah. I think that's Reporter One is. I think something like that. Yeah. But it's clear.
Spirit, yeah.
But that's the interesting thing, because if that's the case, then that's clearly, this is the theory under which the U.S. is now planning to go after journalists, which is, hey, you are encouraging people to steal secrets. You are encouraging the commission of felonious acts.
So they're inching their way towards criminalizing journalism again by
exactly
doing, or in Europe, centimetering their way towards that. You don't say inches, right? So
yeah.
I mean,
no, I think that's a very. But what you said is, of course, is very interesting because, in comparison with the real crimes like torture, mass murder, which is the drone program, it is interesting that we don't talk about that. And all of the crimes that Julian Assange has exposed. No, let's talk about that he doesn't wash his hands after using the toilet, because those are the really serious issues. He doesn't clean up after his kitty, because that's really serious. So let's forget about the sort of killing civilians, torturing, Guantanamo, holding people in prison for decades. No, that's not important. But if you don't wash your hands after using the toilet, that's pretty serious. That's
what the average person could understand. That's why I think they're pushing that. One reason they're pushing that. If the average person understood that he was serving them by revealing crimes their government was committing in their name, that's not where they want to go. And most people don't want to apparently, admit that their government can do such a thing. They have an emotional investment in their flag, in their state, in their president, or maybe not this one for a lot of people, but in the system that they are employed by. Right? Are they going to hurt their own self-interest? Do they want to admit that their country can do these things?
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. It's what people can understand. In other words, people can understand not cleaning after your kitty. People, can understand these small crimes. They're not able to grasp large crimes, and it's beyond their imagination. I mean, that's the line of Goebbels. I mean, the way when Goebbels said people will believe the big lie because it's so beyond their imaginings that they will believe it. They won't believe the small lies because everyone engages in small lies, and so when somebody gives you a small lie, that you won't believe it because hey, that's a lie. It's like, my dog ate my homework. You don't believe it because you've tried this lie yourself. You're not going to believe it. But if somebody says that some giant lie, which is that there's a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world, you think, hey, well, maybe that's right. I mean, I don't know. What do I know? So people will believe something like that much more than they'll believe the small lies. And the same with, again, people will understand the small, venial stuff but they won't grasp the huge crimes.
And yet, there was a time in American history in the 60s and 70s when the public was able to absorb and understand crimes committed by government that we read about in the Church Committee hearing report. Yep. They actually uncovered these things, and there was a crisis in the legitimacy of the state, of the system at that. And then that was the mid-70s. That all ended in 1980, I think, with the election of Ronald Reagan and the sweeping out of office in that same election of Democrats from the Senate and the House. That was somehow they were able to sharply reverse that.
But if you remember, it actually
the Reagan era. Yeah.
But if you remember, the reversal actually took place before 1980 because William Colby, who was a career CIA person, he's the one who gave all these secrets to the Church Committee. He just handed them over to the shock of President Ford and Henry Kissinger, which is why Ford fired Colby. I mean, he thought Colby shouldn't have given them all this stuff. So, and then George Bush, I think Bush then became head of the CIA. So all of that ended when Bush became head of the CIA. So the reaction against all these exposures took place already before Ronald Reagan. It was already taking place in the mid-1970s. The reaction was already taking place under Jimmy Carter.
Well, Jimmy Carter, when he came to power, he fired a lot of people at the CIA. He reduced the intelligence community down. And there was that. And that had to be stopped too. And Bush became vice president then in 1980, right?
At some point, I would really like to actually play some of that Church Committee material, because I know a lot of our audience probably has heard it, but some of them may have not heard, the admission that they were CIA, connections with the media and all of that. So at some point, that would be great to share. But I also want to just relate that in chat, some people have brought up Ola Binney, who is Assange's, a friend, who is imprisoned in Ecuador without any without, as far as I'm aware, any charges actually levied against him. He's just thrown in prison for no real reason. He's a software developer and an internet, privacy activist. So, it's just, we've got Chelsea Manning, we've got this Ola Binney person, now Daniel Hale, source for The Intercept, is arrested. It is a very bad time right now for whistleblowers and truth tellers around the globe. So,
and I think they're moving in concentric circles from Assange to try to ensnare others in orbit, because their ultimate aim is to shut down WikiLeaks. I mean, I think Pompeo made that clear. And previous administrations, even in the Obama administration, they were talking about this, try to shut down WikiLeaks. They haven't been able to. They haven't been able to get to the server. They can't get them offline even. So that's why this is, we're moving into new territory when they're arresting this Swedish guy down in Ecuador. So if you're traveling outside the U.S. and you're going to a country like that, you have to be careful. And that's something to keep an eye on. How are they going after others who work with Assange?
Right.
This may be only the beginning. Assange.
That's right. And it's important to remember, it's a point that we've made before, which is that they don't have a problem with leaks. They just have a problem with leaks that reflect badly on the U.S. government. I mean, James Comey leaks. I mean, that's he regards it as part of his job, just leaking stuff, leaking classified stuff. But so long as it was delivering what Comey wanted to deliver, he was happy with it. They don't want stuff leaked that reflects badly on the U.S. government. They don't want, the collateral murder video being leaked. That doesn't look good. They don't want, Guantanamo diaries leaked because it doesn't look good. That's what they don't want. That's the leaking that they're against. That's the leaking that they want to stop. So it's very much a self-interested operation.
And again, that's why they focus on Assange's personality rather than what they leaked, which is why Elizabeth and Patrick Lawrence are working with me at Consortium to catalog what those leaks were, to focus on what the information was now. And that highlights why they're going after him. It's not because of the litter box.
Yeah, I mean, and it's sad too. I don't mean to, sit here and just trash The Intercept all day, but I do think it's worth comparing the state of and the situation that the editors of The Intercept they have not been arrested. They have not been prosecuted for what, for their journalism. But we see them taking down the Snowden archive, and that is not just. I see that as just as bad as this arrest of Daniel Hale. And I think that is another part of this picture of all these whistleblowers and activists being arrested and prosecuted. It's a really sad statement on the fact that WikiLeaks is really, truly unique in the way that it has protected its sources. And I know I've said that before, but I think it's worth repeating, and we saw earlier today, John Kiriakou, who's been a frequent guest on these vigils, put out, a pretty strong tweet on this, and I'm going to open it really fast and read it to you all. I saw it earlier, but I'd like to quote it verbatim. One moment while I'm loading it. My computer is rather slow, but it's really, really important that we don't forget that while WikiLeaks has done an amazing, stellar job of vetting its material, protecting its sources, that other outlets have not done that good job. And that's what makes WikiLeaks even more unique in the way that it operates and more of a danger to the establishment. So John Kiriakou's tweet reads, quote, "Serious question for The Intercept. Do you secretly work for the FBI? David Hale, reality winner, and Terry Albury are all in prison because of you. Is it incompetence, or are you compromised? You owe a lot of people an explanation and an apology." And, he, even that tweet, he doesn't even mention the fact that they took down the Snowden archive. And I think that, the serious tweet from somebody who's experienced the wrath of the deep state for revealing the truth.
Well,
go on. Yeah.
Let's hope they are never prosecuted, or any of them. But maybe what you're suggesting, Elizabeth, is that they're playing ball, so they don't get prosecuted.
Exactly.
He did not play ball, and he's the one in jail right now.
Exactly.
Right. That's the way that the chilling effect works. To avoid prosecution. If he's prosecuted on the Espionage Act, that sends a message.
Exactly, and that might explain the reason. And that might explain the reason that Snowden archive has been taken down. If Assange is prosecuted for that, then they may be too.
Right. Yeah, that could be. There was an interesting theory put up about that. I think it was that guy who writes that Moon of Alabama. Do you know that Moon of Alabama website? It's a very good website. I don't know the guy who writes it, but he's really good.
Yeah, Bernard.
Yeah. Do you know him?
No, I don't.
Yeah. I know of him.
Yeah. But he thought that what's the Omidyar wanted really to get his hands on the Snowden archive for his own business interests. I mean, I think that's really the reason he started this whole First Look Media. That the reason why he everything revolved around Greenwald is that he wanted to get his hands on that Snowden archive, and he wanted it for his business interests. I mean, that he's a man with global business interests, and he wanted to use that. And having done that, I mean, he has no further use for it. And I think that's the reason why he's closed it down. I mean, so I think that was his theory. That was always what was about with Omidyar. And I mean, and I actually, the Moon of Alabama thinks that Omidyar will probably close down the Intercept within the next year or so. He has no real further interest in it. It was always really about that Snowden archive. And that was it. He got that. He immediately had access to that Snowden archive. Omidyar, it wasn't just, "Hey, Greenwald, you're doing such great work. I want you to edit a magazine for me." Everything in the deal was the Snowden archive, and was that Omidyar got control of that archive, and so that's kind of, and once he's closed it down, there's no real added value for him to keep the Intercept going.
And we all know, and many of us remember that, Omidyar was part of or connected to that whole, basically financial blockade of WikiLeaks very early on via PayPal. So there's no reason to really trust Omidyar to have good intentions in this area.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's no question. I mean, there is something very dispiriting about the fact that those people like Scahill or Greenwald and so on, I mean, they enjoy this very high privileged life, while their sources are sort of rotting in prison. I mean, at a different level, and maybe it's unfair to the Intercept, like the Guardian, who sort of made huge amounts of money off WikiLeaks without suffering any of the pain that WikiLeaks has suffered. Basically, the only people who've made any money has been the Guardian.
And as Joe said, that doesn't mean that we're saying that the Guardian should be punished. It's just that it's very unfair that they have profited and then they have not gone to bat for Assange. They've turned around and stabbed him in the back. And
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know of any Greenwald source that has been uncovered. His source was Snowden, who uncovered himself, of course. He announced to the public he was behind that.
Why did he do that, incidentally? I never understood why he did that.
I don't know. I mean, I've never heard a reason given for that.
No, he explained it at the time, but I'm trying to remember what he said, because viewers can go and look that up, because he did. I think he did explain that he wanted his name out there. I think it might have been. I think he said that he didn't want the witch hunt that would come within the NSA to try to find out who the leaker is, and that would make a lot of people's lives miserable, and maybe a lot of innocent people could have been dragged into that. So he wanted to put an end to that. There was no longer going to be an NSA internal investigation to find the leaker if he announced that he was the leaker. I think that was his reason.
It's pretty selfless reason if that was his reasoning. Yeah.
Yes. He did it once he got to Hong Kong, right? It was in Hong Kong that he revealed.
Yeah, I believe so.
Himself as the leaker.
But then he was in a lot of trouble, because then the US withdrew his passport, and he was really up against it.
Well, in mid-flight, if I understand, to Moscow, where he was going to transfer to another plane, they canceled his passport. That's why he got stuck there.
Yes.
Putin, he ran into Putin's arms. He had no intention of going to Russia. Staying in Russia. He was there to transfer.
But I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine, though, if WikiLeaks had removed its own archive of the Afghan war diaries or Cablegate or Vault 7? I mean, can you imagine what the reaction would be in the public if that happened? I think it would be pretty intense.
Well, to be fair, Greenwald has put out that he's looking for somebody else to take it over, right? That has the resources to start publishing or digging into it. So I don't. That's Greenwald speaking. He's not the Intercept. A lot of people confuse.
Right.
I agree. But without Greenwald, there would be no Intercept. I mean, Omidyar started the Intercept. It was around Greenwald. I mean, Greenwald was a central figure, even though you're absolutely right. The Intercept is not Greenwald. But without Greenwald, there would have been no Intercept.
Snowden was the central figure for what you're saying is right there.
Exactly. No, that's right. It was the archive. The archive was key. Yeah.
But it's not like they've destroyed it, like the Guardian broke up that hard drive right in front of the MI.
Right.
People in the basement of the Guardian or something. They haven't destroyed it, and they're not saying they won't give it to someone else. Well, it remains to be seen if that happens. But I think it's important in defense of Greenwald to say he's not the Intercept, he's not the editor, and I think he's often been in conflict with the people at the Intercept. He takes very different views, such as on Russiagate. They brought in establishment reporters like James Risen, formerly of the New York Times, to write these garbage Russiagate stories. And they went over to the other side. And Greenwald did not agree with them.
Right. And Scahill also talked a lot of rubbish about Russiagate. I mean,
I don't know about that. I can't speak to that.
No, again, because Aaron Matte, I think, actually got a record. He sent out a few tweets, recording all the absurdities that Scahill has actually written about Russiagate. Aaron Matte was the point was that Greenwald was suggesting, the Intercept has really been good on Russiagate, and Matte said, look, Greenwald's been pretty good, but the rest of the Intercept team hasn't. There's Risen and, there's Scahill. So, there's no good, Greenwald just saying, how great the Intercept has been. The Intercept has not been great on Russiagate. But Scahill definitely, has been not at all good on Russiagate.
Okay, I didn't know that. I'm not a close follower of everything he says and does. We're coming to the end of this vigil. I thought, thank you, George, for extending it. I think Elizabeth almost.
Thank you.
We know we can count on you wherever you are in the world. Are you in Buda or in Pest?
I'm in Pest.
You're in Pest.
In Pest.
George, live from Pest.
Live from Pest, exactly.
How's the weather? Can you walk across the bridge into Buda later?
Yeah, I mean, it was Well, not now. Now, or at the moment, it's a little late here. But but the weather was quite fine. But it's been pretty miserable the last few days.
I remember the first time I arrived in Buda and Pest, it was there was about a 22-inch snowstorm. And I had one day, and I was determined to see this city, and I trunched around through this blizzard.
Right.
And then went into a restaurant which was very warm and had a goulash. But I was only back to Budapest in a beautiful weather and discovered what an incredibly marvelous city it really is. There's no question about it.
It is a beautiful city. The drawback is, of course, the language. And the language is very difficult. And unfortunately, I mean, Hungarians are a very nationalistic people. They're very proud of their country. So they don't often bother to learn any other languages, which is okay if you're a Frenchman, because, you know, French is one of the world's great languages. And so you say, well, the hell with, I'm not going to learn English. You know, I've got French. But, you know, if your native language is Magyar, well, no one in the world speaks Magyar. So you kind of, you do need to know at least one of the world's great languages. But unfortunately, Hungarians just don't. I mean, they think, hey, we've got a great language. We like it. You know, what do I need to learn anything else?
You find it difficult too. You grew up in London, right?
I grew up in London, so my Hungarian, I have to say, is quite rustic. It's, I mean, because I haven't really used it in a long time. So it's I have difficulties getting around.
Can you go out and lead a protest in favor of Julian Assange?
I could. I could. But I would have to think. I mean, the Hungarians are just simply they go along with NATO. They just follow the NATO line. They haven't really taken any particular position on Julian Assange. I mean, they're just saying, well, what's the NATO position? We'll just stick with it. So I don't know whether, you know, protesting in Budapest will be necessarily that effective. I think people here will be a little bit puzzled. They want to know, you know, who is Julian Assange?
But we haven't had the Hungarian diaries haven't been published yet.
No, that's true.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you to the viewers. We're doing this every week. Whether we get one guest or no guests, there's always news. There was a hell of a lot of news last week that we.
Is there news coming up just, you know, this week? I mean, was there something we should be looking out for in the next 7 days?
The UN, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, might make a statement, which will be pretty important, particularly about the results of the medical examination. Basically, he's going to determine whether he's been tortured or not. I think that's what I hope. So that will be really important. Then there is the next court hearing is not till May 30th, I believe, so there won't be anything new on the extradition side. Chelsea Manning will probably be arrested again next Thursday, the day before we go back to air.
It's next Thursday. Okay, May the 16th. Okay.
Because she's already received a subpoena to talk to the new grand jury, and she's already made it abundantly clear she will not. So she's ready to go back in jail again. So that will be something. And hopefully there are more protests around the world, and we never know what's going to come up. You know, there's a lot of news all the time and plenty to talk about. And hopefully George will join us again.
Yep.
You'll still be in Hungary?
I will be in Hungary. Yes. Well, yeah. Thank you, Joe and Elizabeth, for organizing this. It's great that you know on the nail. You do it every week. It's very important to keep doing this.
Well, thank you
so much.
A pleasure to be here as always. So.
Yeah. All right. So we'll meet up next week. Thank you.
Yep.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.